It was the dawn of the third age of podcasting, 30 years after the series had launched.
The Babylon podcast was a dream given form. Its goal, to discuss the place where humans and aliens could work out their differences peacefully.
It's a port of call, home away from home for established fans, newbies, Jon, Blaine, and guests.
Humans and aliens wrapped in 2,500,000 tons of spinning metal, all alone in the night.
It could be a dangerous place.
Wait, what?
But it's our last, best hope for peace.
This is the story of the last of the Babylon stations.
The year is 2024.
The name of the podcast is
Babylon 5, 30 years later.
Hello and welcome back to a brand new episode of Babylon 5, 30 years later. This is a podcast that, well, usually looks at every episode of Babylon 5, that hit classic 1990s science fiction drama that everyone knows and loves 30 years after it came out. So I am John Wilson, and I've never seen Babylon 5 except for the episodes we talked about, and I've never talked to you about it except for the times we've done these feedback episodes. So with me to do feedback with me on your feedback is Blaine Dowler. Hi, Blaine.
Hi, John. How are you doing?
I am doing all right. You know, Santa brought the present bag and the mail bag. So I am ready to talk about some feedback.
Okay, before we get into that, we should say, because of circumstances around the holidays, we are recording this about a week earlier than we had announced in our last episode recorded that you've heard. So if you submitted feedback by the announced deadline and it's not here, it's probably because we had to record early, in which case you'll hear it in our next feedback special.
Yes, you will not be left out. You'll just be delayed. But we love all of you and all the things you send us.
Yes. And we have some comments from new people we haven't heard comments from before who apparently found the podcast and have caught up since our last feedback episode.
Well, first, what we want to do is, since we've gotten to the end of the first season and a little bit into the second season, there were some comments along the way that we sort of censored at the time because for first-time viewers, we wanted to stay spoiler-friendly. So we're going to go sort of back through some of the previous conversations and pull out some stuff that was said so we can address it. So unless you had any other ado?
No, we just have the two of those to go through. So comments 1 and 4 in our sequence here.
So without further ado, here is the do from Doug Adamson. And this came back in March. So, and he was talking about episode 5 of season 1 called The Parliament of Dreams over on YouTube. He said, there are few TV shots that still stick with me years later. The final sequence in this episode, The Parliament of Dreams, is one of those. Your coverage of this episode reminded me of why I really liked the character of Jeffrey Sinclair and how I often wondered how the show would have gone with him staying on. Of course, we couldn't talk about him not staying on when we were talking about that episode. Much in the way I often wonder how things would have played out with Lieutenant Commander Laurel Takashima. However, knowing the story of why Michael O'Hare had to leave the show, it's always nice to hear stories about how good he was as an actor, and the backstory of him remembering the names made me smile. That episode ending is one of the things about season 1 of Babylon 5 that I still love the most.
Yeah, that's one of the season 1 images that stuck with me the most decades later when they just come around the corner. For those who aren't matching it with the titles, that was the one where Sinclair had to show dignitaries the dominant religion of Earth and they didn't have one. So he brought them into a hallway with just person after person after person, and they were actually people of those faiths. And the comment about him remembering the names, we saw a good 30 or 40 people in that line, and he had to go through the line twice to learn every single one of their names and religions. So, yeah, that was a great one.
So, when you're talking about the future, and you're talking about the future of humanity, the idea that we're not going to become a monolith, that we're always going to have our, I don't want to use divisions in the sense of socially divided, but just the divisions of the different kinds of philosophy and faith and everything. And the Babylon 5, at least nominally, because let's be honest, it doesn't do a heck ton to show a lot of that on the regular, but it does do some. And that's good. So, and this was an episode opportunity to just really show that it's all still there.
Yes. All right. Our next comment is a comment on YouTube from new commenter Hagbard Celine 7118. This one came in on December 10th about episode 1.07. So this is about the war prayer. So we have Londo setting up the arranged or doing the arranged marriage thing. You know, it's the Romeo and Juliet story. Mm-hmm. While racists are stabbing and branding people on Babylon 5.
Stupid racists.
Yes. Anyway, so the comment is, I'm having a great time with this pod so far, and if you want to do a reversal and cover Twin Peaks, I'd be very happy. B5, Twin Peaks, and Trek are my holy trinity of TV. Well, have we got good news for you?
We must have made some sort of passing comment, but I can't remember. I can't imagine us having that idea way back in episode 7 of season 1.
That's the one where listeners found out that I had never seen Twin Peaks. It just came up because there was cast crossover. But yes, that actually is the plan. When we're done Babylon 5, we are going to do a role reversal. Well, John is the expert guiding me through Twin Peaks.
And we've also already started doing episodes of Star Trek novels. Those have not yet begun release, but they are in the plans for the future, and we're already creating them.
Yes, we've recorded a few of those for the Star Trek Reading Hour, which will premiere on September 8th, 2026.
Which is the Count Decade 60th anniversary of Star Trek?
Yes. Designed specifically to be the 60th anniversary of Star Trek. And at some point after B5 is done, we'll have to look at recording schedules and figure out what release schedule we want. We are going to start releasing the Twin Peaks show. Mm-hmm. So yes, your Holy Trinity is coming.
For me, the Holy Trinity is Doctor Who, Star Trek, and Star Wars. But it's hard to make a Trinity because there's just so much stuff that I like.
Yeah, I get that. I've already done my X-Files show. That would be in my Trinity. And Doctor Who, there's a lot of it. And I actually did a Doctor Who podcast, Doctor Who 50 in 50. The 50 days before the 50th anniversary had a podcast a day. So
those were fun. The next comment is from Goddess Tier from October 24th on YouTube, talking about episode 9 of season 1, which was Deathwalker. And they say, always loved Jadur, especially in the expanded, not canon lore. I had always thought there should have been more about the previous war as a backdrop, much as was done with the Earth-Minbari conflict. I suppose they were restricted by the budget. So Jadur is that she's the actual Deathwalker? Yeah. We haven't gotten to her yet in non-canon lore, so I guess that's an upcoming novel.
Yeah, it would definitely be upcoming. I have started reading novel 9. We recorded coverage of the first 6. And
I'm early in 7, but you read way ahead.
Yes, which turned out to be a good thing because I'm also reading for school, because the school I'm at this year asked me to teach a science fiction course that students have been asking for years, but none of the teachers felt comfortable teaching it. And I'm reading everything that the students are doing for their final projects or watching or whatever, whether it's book or movie or whatnot. So yes, I have recently finished Divergent and started Insurgent, and I've got The Maze Runner coming up as well. Those are the books they chose I hadn't read yet. I'm already familiar with War of the Worlds, which is another one, but yes. So yes, lots of reading plus scripts and whatnot.
Right.
The only other comment that we saved for spoiler purposes, unfortunately, we saved a summary. We can't find the original comment. But this is attributed to Ryan Wilson on June 9th about signs and portents. And the summary we have is that he made a comment about the station commander rank, and bringing on a captain seems to coincide with Sisko getting a promotion on Deep Space Nine.
So I remember those two happening. I specifically remember Sisko getting his promotion. It happened at the end of season 3, which coincides with the end of season 2 for Babylon 5. So as we're talking about the episodes, it's still in our future, but you had some background story on that.
Yes, so these do seem to be independent events. In the Sinclair and Sheridan case, it was simply a matter of the fact that Sinclair was commander and not a captain was a sign about how far down the pecking order he was, and that the Minbari wanted him specifically. It was a piece of that puzzle, which would not apply to any of his replacements. So it just, story sense, if Sinclair was replaced by anybody, it had to be captain or better. In terms of Sisko, the reason that they promoted him, as far as we could tell, had nothing to do with Babylon 5. The way Ira Stephen Bear tells the story, who was the showrunner at the time. TV Guide did an article saying who was the best Star Trek captain. It's either Kirk, Picard, or Janeway. So Bear called up TV Guide and said, hey, what about our guy? And the response he got was, well, your guy's a commander and not a captain. At which point, Myra Stephen Bear hung up the phone, went directly to the writer's room and said, okay, whatever story we're breaking down now, the pre-credits teaser is celebrating Sisko's promotion to captain. Because he didn't want to give them that excuse.
And I had no idea that that was the reason at the time. I do remember TV Guide's fascination with the different Star Treks, which was great. I do remember the constant competition between captains. I do remember that Sisko wasn't involved in that and then later could be because, of course, he became captain. As a show watcher, it just felt like the stakes of the show were escalating and it made sense to elevate him to captain. They were getting the Defiant and the stuff with the Dominion was ramping up. We had no idea yet how far it would ramp up, but him becoming captain felt earned and natural. Up until that point, I had just thought, okay, well, captains run starships, commanders run bases. I have no idea how much of a real world parallel that has as far as how military ranks, do things. But I did see online a comparison. Why did the two black captains have to fight their way to their rank in Star Trek? And I just felt like that was such like the worst possible spin on it, because Michael Burnham and Ben Sisko both started out in positions in the story where they weren't intended to be captains. But as their story progressed and as they grew as characters, they earned their right to be captain. And I thought it was just so much more, organic and natural and, like I said, well earned. But people will people.
Yeah, I think I saw that same social media post, and I was like, the whole point of Discovery with Burnham, she doesn't start anywhere near captain, and she starts young. If you look at her, by the time she becomes captain, she's one of the youngest captains we've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's a slight on her that they started telling her story before that, because that was the goal. That was what Brad Fuller said. He said, or maybe it wasn't Fuller still at the time. Maybe it was his replacement in season 1 saying, no, our goal is to see her go through this journey. But that show changed a lot from what Brian Fuller had to what we got on screen.
Right. But that idea that she went on a journey was still there. And yeah, she was a prisoner in episode 2. And every single place she had in Starfleet was not in her possession as her story begins after the Battle of Binary Stars.
Yeah, if you want to gripe about that, gripe about the fact that it takes place about 10 years before the original series, when they stated there's no record of a mutiny ever happening on a Starfleet vessel. And the mutiny is not one of the things that they put in the secret can and that you would never talk about at the end of that.
Yeah, but they also call Vulcan Vulcania. We're not gonna sow strife between Discovery canon and other canon. Yeah. We're not gonna give fuel to that fire. There's no need to do that.
Yep. Personally, I just think if you go back to Enterprise, there is an episode where there are Borg because the timeline had changed with First Contact. As far as I'm concerned, Discovery is just on that branch timeline. So minor differences are going to be there.
Yeah, I didn't think of it as a branch timeline. I thought of all of Star Trek as being holistic. So we get to our first chunky email. Chunky email from Douglas Adamson came in September 9th, talking about episodes 18 through 22. So Douglas says, hello, Blaine and John. Apologies for the late follow-up feedback. Why apologize? We just love that you're writing. I don't have much to add to my previous congratulations for maintaining the quality of the show as, well, you've maintained the quality of the show. I appreciate you noticing. We get in here early every morning and shine the microphones. So, gotta have the quality going. He says, the latest batch of episodes covered the point in time that on first viewing back in the day on Channel 4 in the UK, I realized the show was going to be special. Voice in the Wilderness parts 1 and 2 really expanded the universe in a way we hadn't experienced since Catherine Sakai's trip to Sigma 957. So Voice in the Wilderness was where they had the planet below, and we really get our first glimpses of the scope of age with the setting of the show because there's a machine down below that's been doing whatever it's doing for hundreds of years. He says, sure, we'd seen hints of something brewing with signs and portents, but the reveal of the civilization on the supposedly long dead world and the concept of how old it was. He's saying exactly what I was thinking. I was just trying to recap what the episode was. Well, that showed me that even within the B5 universe, Babylon 5's existence was merely a tiny moment, not even a full note in the symphony of the history of the galaxy. I know JMS talks about how little he remembers of writing these episodes, but I do wonder how on earth the planet would have interacted with the station without this story. Would we ever have visited it? You get speculation on that, or?
Yeah, I think it was, a lot of this was planned. So the network did come and say, hey, the Gathering is selling really well as a movie on home video. Can you put together a two-parter? So I think maybe he structured the story as a two-parter, but having the Great Machine down there, I think, was already a part of the plan, if I remember.
Yeah, I would imagine that's the A plot that the original episode was going to be, was the planet setting up fire and then going down to sea and everything. Some of the details of that exploration were probably expanded and the whole Michael Garibaldi thing was added in. But Douglas continues, but as exciting as A Voice in the Wilderness was, Babylon Squared came along, managed to deepen the mystery, expand the conflicts, slam quality sci-fi concepts such as time travel, and answer some questions all in the same breath, and introduce us to Zathras, who might be the most imitated quoted character in all of B5 fandom. I didn't know what to make of Zathras at first. He was weird. He says, for someone who has such limited screen time, he stole the episode. That such a character who seems comedic but never really is, manages to convey so much, is a testament to both JMS and Tim Choate. It's also an episode which, while it showed its sci-fi elements, it also managed to be humorous and real. The whole debate about Zip and Fasten felt like these were real people who happened to have an extraordinary job, which was unlike it seemed to me extraordinary people who happen to have jobs in Stay Starfleet. They were and remain relatable. Yeah, the Zip and Fasten was very fun. We don't get enough of those moments, honestly, where they're just talking about whatever. But the show has a lot more going on in the part that we're recording currently.
Yes, it does. Our next episode to be covered is season 4, episode 5, if anyone's curious where the recording schedule's at.
Yeah. So we are exactly 2 seasons ahead because we're after the first chunk of season 4 episodes, and we're, of course, putting this out after the first chunk of season 2 episodes. Douglas says, I always say to those who struggle to get through B5 that there are certain points which you have to give it a go to. If you get to the end of Parliament of Dreams and are undecided, you have to get to the end of Signs and Portents. If you can get there and still are unsure, make yourself get to the end of Babylon Squared. If by that point you're okay to bail, fine. You'll miss the amazing stuff still to come. But I think Babylon Squared is the best of season 1. And looking back, what a season it was. Best of season 1. What do you think?
I would think if you're still on the fence in Babylon Squared, maybe go to Chrysalis because it's only 2 more episodes. And that is quite the season finale. But yeah, Babylon Squared is really, really strong. If it's not the best, it's a serious contender.
Season 1 struggles a lot with what it expects the viewers to stay true to. There's not a lot stringing you along from episode to episode, it's just giving you stories, which again was the expectation of the day. So that's fine. Not a strike against it. But just in comparison with the later seasons, yeah, I would have a hard time choosing a best of season 1. But Babylon Squared is certainly the highest concept and the most sci-fi of the season, and that gets it a lot of points.
It is. And like you said, the show has grown. Season 1, it was fine, but later it becomes amazing.
Mm-hmm. Douglas finishes by saying, thank you both for allowing me to join you on this journey to remind myself once again how cleverly built this show was and how groundbreaking it was to reach on air. I know many argue that other shows are better, but until JMS brought B5 to life by force of will, nothing had ever been attempted like this before, and it took B5 to lead the way. I forgot you had to wait till Chrysalis. It's well documented that in the UK we saw it a few weeks before North America, something that happened a few times with the show. I'll keep an eye on the feed while we wait. Thank you, Douglas, very much for that email.
Yes, thank you. Our next email was from Ryan Wilson on October 20th. This is about the Voice in the Wilderness 2-parter. He says, hello to the Babylon 5 team. These are pretty fun episodes. What Blaine mentioned about the network asking for a VHS release makes sense. It might be why there's more action here than most of the other episodes so far. Some more humor with Londo and Delenn. From what I remember, Londo not quite understanding human culture is a recurring joke, so his dismay at the lyrics of the Hokey Pokey fit in pretty well. Mira Furlan's delivery of, we came at a bad time, always amuses me. Now about the Garibaldi in the elevator scene. Would this be written differently today? I didn't get the impression that we are supposed to think Garibaldi is stalking Talia, but I have a feeling if this were written now, it would be more clear that this was a coincidence. What do you think? So just as a refresher, I think this is the scene where Talia and Sinclair were talking, and Talia says it's weird. He's always in the elevator when I get there. And the elevator doors open after Sinclair tries to reassure her, and there's Garibaldi. So Talia and Sinclair decide to take the stairs.
Yes.
So I think they would have toned it down a little bit, because I agree that stalking was not the intent, but we are more aware of those issues today. So it would have to be done in a way that's more clear that stalking is not what's happening.
Right.
Ryan continues, I'm always a sucker for exploring the mysteries of ancient ruins. Also good for Londo to get a heroic moment or two. A pretty good 2-part episode all in all.
And I did want to say that the thing with the Hokey Pokey, that was just good humor. Like, it served no purpose to anything in the larger episode, but just having that there as just a complete mystification between the Minbari and the Centauri. Not only Londo's confusion with the human fascination with the song, but Delenn's and what's-his-name's confusion about Londo's sort of spastic reaction to it. All of it just went in to make some good humor. So our next piece of feedback is from our good friend Gene Hendricks. Gene, he actually wrote an email a little while back that got lost in the shuffle. So we did not mean to leave this out, but we have it here now. He says, hello, Blaine and John. I've really been enjoying your coverage of Babylon 5, which is a very interesting contrast to Vera and Jesse's coverage over on Jumpgate. I am not familiar with Vera and Jesse over on Jumpgate. I particularly like hearing John's reactions to the episodes and just how many things need to be remembered for the future. Now on to the reason I'm writing in. On A Voice in the Wilderness Part 1, Blaine was explaining how exterior shots were reused and how it was noticeable on binge watching. As an example, he used the Star Trek space station that was, according to him, built for the Wrath of Khan. Blaine, I admire your knowledge and intellect, but in this case you are wrong. How in Odin's name could you forget that exquisite model was built for the first and, in my opinion, greatest of all Star Trek films? Of course, it's the station that Admiral Kirk beams to and departs in a travel pod with Scotty. It got a bigger part as Regula 1 in the next movie, yes, but it was never filmed better or from more angles than in the motion picture. I expect you to do better next time. Gene, famed the motion picture Uberfan.
Yes, Gene is absolutely right. I tend to associate with Wrath of Khan because one of the things they did moving from motion picture to Wrath of Khan to make it less obvious they were using it is turn the model upside down.
Mm-hmm.
Even though right side up and upside down are hard to define in space, but that's the way they shot it. And
Right.
then when they reused it on TV episodes again and again, they left it quote unquote upside down. So it looks the same as it did in Wrath of Khan and not the way it was in motion picture. But yes, Gina's absolutely right. It was originally built for motion picture. And then when they did Wrath of Khan for a third of the budget, they reused as much as they could.
That's the space station that he and Scotty come out of before the, what I like to call, Admiral Kirk Enterprise masturbatory scene.
Yes, the one that is a lot shorter. I am also a fan of Motion Picture Heaven for a while. I do really like the 4K edition. It's actually been remastered and adjusted twice. A bit of backstory on that. They were so rushed in production that even for the premiere, the print was still wet. Like the score was finished. They finished recording the score on a Wednesday. That Friday was the premiere.
Mm-hmm.
So Robert Wise showed up and the print was still wet. It was in cardboard boxes. It didn't have the metal cans that were typical then. It was shedding. So if you've seen a film brand new, they usually let it dry for a while and then run it through very soft cleaners once after it's dried because little flecks will shed from it. So it would have looked dirty when they were filming it or when they were screening it that first time. Robert Wise has said that first theatrical release always felt like a work print to him rather than a finished product because he didn't have time to really sit down and edit the way he wanted to. When it came out on DVD, they did a remastered version with Wise's notes, but Wise was not in the room. And the person whose company did those visual effects was actually a member of the Larry Niven email fan group I was a part of. And he was a little cranky because Paramount wouldn't budget for Blu-ray level effects, only DVD level effects. And he's going, this is around the corner. Let's do it right so we don't have to go through this whole process one more time. And so that's why it wasn't on Blu-ray for a while, at least not in that remastered edition. And then in 4K, when they remastered it, they talked to Wise and he was in the room with them. So the Ultra HD version is the best version of the closest to Wise's actual vision. It's the director's cut. It's my preferred version. And it does shorten that scene. He never intended the scene where Kirk going past the Enterprise is as long as it was, even though a lot of people enjoy it, which is the comment I was getting to with that whole tangent.
My dominant experience with a motion picture was an extended cut VHS that I watched. Not as much as I saw 2 and 3, because I had 2 and 3 on a recording on tape as a small child and saw many times. And I got the motion picture whenever I actually became a fan in my teens. So when they made the director's edition on DVD, I really liked a lot of the changes made to the film, the visual effects and some of the, things that they did. But there were several bits of dialogue in the extended edition that did not make the cut that I miss. And like whenever the movie's going along, my head will insert those because I expect them to be there and they're not. But we have a lot of feedback to get through, so we can't go off on too many tangents here.
Nope. Just one last thing. I may not be as much of a motion picture fan as Gene, but of that original Crew series, I say 5 of the 6 are good. You can guess which one I'm omitting. It's not the first. Now, the next comment is also from Gene, and it was on John's website, posted August 12th, specifically on Babylon Squared. And Gene says, allow me to steal something that they do over on From Crisis to Crisis. Zathras!
For those who don't know, From Crisis to Crisis is a Superman podcast that many people in Gene's and Blaine's and my, shall we say, generation of podcasting are familiar with. And anytime Bibbo Babowski shows up in a Superman comic, Mike and Jeff go, Bibbo! And because Bibbo's a delightful character, and Zathras is a delightful character. Doesn't show up as much as Bibbo does, but Zathras! Okay, so Jon in Glenmont chimes in on Babylon Squared on September 3rd through email saying, Hi, John. I have been thinking about rewatching Babylon 5 for years, and I'm so glad that I discovered this show when I did. A question about Babylon 4. Has JMS ever said more about its location? We know that Babylon 5 is orbiting a planet, which is presumably in orbit around a star. So unless Babylon 4 is at a Lagrange point, shouldn't the location of Babylon 4 relative to Babylon 5 constantly be changing? Also, why isn't Babylon 4 also built in orbit around a planet? And were the first 3 Babylon stations begun construction in locations more similar to Babylon 4 or Babylon 5? I just would be curious as to how much world building there actually is there. That's a fantastic question, because just going on conversations that are had, I would have expected them all to be in roughly the same location. But Babylon 4 is in another sector from Babylon 5. Like it's far enough away to be on a grid map.
Yes, and the primary difference there is that 4 was going to be the biggest and best of the Babylon stations, to the point that it was capable of interstellar travel on its own. So it wouldn't have to be bound to a planet. So I think it's Sector 17, but the sector that the anomaly is in was the sector where Babylon 4 was going to be when it was created. I think it's the time travel shenanigans that keep it in that sector when we interact with it. Babylon 4 was going to be the only one that can move under its own power, so I suspect 1, 2, and 3 were going to be built in orbit as well and were destroyed. But again, that's my suspicion. I don't remember confirmation on that. But yes, Babylon 4 would have been mobile and would have changed over time, except, as we saw in Babylon Squared, those events were happening from the perspective of the characters on that station. as one continuous thing. It had just disappeared a few minutes before and reappeared in the same sector in space. I am assuming then, I've actually often just assumed in a lot of time travel stories, that when you're traveling, you ride the gravity well you're in, because, things in space are moving and you don't want to end up in the middle of a vacuum and die. So I'm just thinking, like, yes, if something disappears in the gravity well of a star, as that star moves, it moves through time within that same relative position in the gravity well. So it gets dragged along with it, which is why, time traveling on Earth, you're still on Earth and whatnot.
So on the smaller scale, Babylon 5 is moving because it's in orbit around the planet and the planet is in orbit around a star. But on a larger scale, that star and all other stars around it are orbiting the galactic core. So we're all going to be in relatively the same position compared to one another. So yes, you might have to go farther because you're going the opposite side of the star system to that sector, but the show just kind of ignores that little tidbit, and because we're talking about between stars, not within a system.
Yeah. All right. So our next pair of comments are from Hagbard Celine 7118 again from December 13th, commenting on Babylon Squared. The initial comment was, since you brought up audio anyway, one of you, I think John, don't really know my names to a voice, is way quieter than the other. And then he replied to his own comment saying it was fixed in this episode. Yeah, actually, I think the main shift there is that I picked up Sound Op. I'm the one that does the editing. Traditionally, I've been using Audacity, and I still use it for some of the editing. I like using Sound Op for noise reduction and leveling. And if mine is the only voice, I use it for the editing as well. But when I haven't figured out a way to have it let me edit one track and not the other without shifting to separate views of just that track, which is inconvenient. So I do the final edits in Audacity still. But SoundOp has, I think, a much better normalization subroutine built in than any of the add-on packs I have found for Audacity. So I think it's helping us get much more consistent voices out of it.
And every now and then, just in the course of human events, there's going to be a editing gaffe. And it's frustrating because the way Blaine and I both do our podcast, there's usually a bit of a time between when we finish editing the show when it actually goes up, because we finish, upload, post, and go on to other things. And so whenever an episode comes out and there's a gaffe, it's like, I remember listening to one and there was just a lot of quieter voice moments cut from the episode. And that was just, a gaffe on that one episode. It was not a trend in things. So there will, every now and then be little problems, which we don't like to have, but it happens. The next one is from Ryan. He has an email on episodes 20 and 21. So these are Babylon Squared and The Quality of Mercy. He says, to the Babylon 5 crew. Oh, that's not us. That's Sinclair. We're going to have to get them over here. He says, needless to say, Babylon Squared is one of my favorite episodes of the series. I love time travel episodes. I love mysteries. I love getting questions that are not answered right away so I can come up with theories. Okay. I'm glad you like questions that don't get answered right away. I like answers to my questions, but knowing that they're coming is fine. Knowing that they're coming, I can wait. Ryan says, and then we get Zathras. I don't know if that's a good thing in Ryan's tone or a bad thing in Ryan's tone. Is he like, yes, but then Zathras? I don't know what he's saying there.
Well, I don't know. Maybe we'll figure it out if Zathras ever shows up again.
Zathras. Leaving the episode with a much older Sinclair is just so rich with possibilities. I think he's still in the positive tone here. Okay. Some questions that maybe Blaine can answer. Some of these involve spoilers, some do not, but I will try to phrase these questions delicately. If they give away too much, you can ignore them. 1. Did JMS know about cast changes when this episode was written/directed?
The answer, yes. For this one, he did. So for Chrysalis, he did not, because that was filmed as episode 12 in the production order. This was much closer to the end of the season production. In production order, it was number 18, so it wasn't that last batch of 5 or 6, and at that point they knew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Chrysalis, the finale was done way early in production. So even though it's the last episode of the season, the stuff that they knew about going out of the season, they did not know about yet. But the other final few episodes, they did know that Sinclair had believing and such. Number 2. I have been trying to keep track of when we learn about different races, mythologies, and histories. For example, when did we learn that Narn don't have telepaths? The pilot movie. And similar examples. My question then, is this the first mention we get of the great Minbari hero Valen? If he's mentioned before this, I didn't catch it.
I think in the original broadcast, it was the first mention or one of the first mentions.
Right.
In the remastered version of The Gathering, there is another mention.
But it's background. It's not, you wouldn't draw attention to it. It's just like a background thing, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's very hard to notice, especially on a first watch.
Mm-hmm. I remembered we were going through this because I've been rewatching these as as our podcast episodes have been coming out. I've been rewatching with Mindy because she knew of Babylon 5 a little bit, but had never actually watched it through. So we've been watching it through, and I remember, so that's the first mention of Valen. As for number 3, Ryan, your third question, even though you phrased it delicately, does suggest some things that get into spoiler heavy territory. So we're going to leave it off, but you know what your question was, and the answer is, Blaine?
Yes.
There you go. We can come back to that question down the road. Ryan says, definitely an amazing episode. The quality of mercy. This is one of those interesting sci-fi concepts. I can see someone coming up with the death of personality punishment as a way to avoid the death penalty, but I'm not sure this is actually a better solution. Yeah, it's weird. It's weird.
Yeah, I'm also unconvinced it's better. It's one of those things where you could say, oh, it's better because of X, but X is so superficial as it to like not matter really at all. So the person who's subjected to the penalty, it's really not much different in the end. You could make the case, though, that it's easier for the society to turn them into a productive member and help with reparations. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that does seem like the kind of thing that, while it's mentioned equality of mercy, it does leave room for a lot more exploration.
I mean, if your choices are killing them, putting them in a really big box until they die, or changing their personality and so that they're a completely different person so they can be productive in society, I'm not sure what the least of those evils is. But everything but the box is very final and irreversible. And what if you're wrong? So yeah. It's a difficult thing. Ryan goes on to say Londo's and Lanier's adventures. This is the kind of thing we don't get to see on television as much since everything has to be part of the story arc. Just two actors playing it up and playing off each other. There's nothing wrong with this sort of thing, and I miss it from current television shows. Mindy is a bit of a gearhead and a bit of a bike fan. So when we got to that episode, she enjoyed seeing the motorcycle on screen. I think there were a couple of details about it that they got wrong, but overall she enjoyed seeing it on there. Ryan goes on, we get some futuristic medical problems, the healing machine and overuse of stimulants. The healing machine especially seems like it is foreshadowing something or other. So now we wait for the finale. Be seeing you.
Yeah, at this point we've seen that healing machine show up again.
Yeah. It really was put in place in one episode and then used in the next episode, wasn't it?
Pretty close to it, yeah. So it was used very early in season 2 after being introduced in the second last of season 1.
Yeah, Quality of Mercy is where it was brought in. Garibaldi is hurt in Chrysalis, which is what's going to need it coming into season 2. It's really like the Phantom Zone projector. The Phantom Zone projector gets introduced in one issue and then used on Mon-El the next month. So it's almost like which one came first, like conceptually.
Yes. And then got its best use, as far as I'm concerned, in Superman Family Adventures issue 8 by Art and Franco.
I loved that series, but I forget exactly the details of what you're mentioning.
I think it was Art's idea originally. I don't remember if it was Art or Franco, but the concept is that, hey, Jor-El was trying to save his family, and now they've retconned that he invented the Phantom Zone projector. He sent Superman's mother into the Phantom Zone so she would survive the destruction of Krypton, and Superman can get her back.
Oh, okay.
Yes, Art and Franco are great guys. Franco was actually gracious enough. Part of my teaching role this year is helping out with grade 6 art, which includes outcomes about using art to tell a narrative story. And I reached out to Franco and we had a fantastic Q&A over Google Meet, where the students could ask him questions about the comics industry, how it works, how he did it. It was fantastic.
That's pretty fun. I had no idea that happened. That's really cool.
All right. So the next piece of feedback came from YouTube, and it was actually feedback on the feedback episode from FSM Dog. This is a YouTube comment, and the comment is, how long before someone's first encounter with the Holy Grail is Monty Python? And the answer to that is definitely that it's already happened, because I had classmates in junior high who were shocked when Indiana Jones and the Lost Crusade came out because they thought that it was a Monty Python reference, because they thought Monty Python invented the concept.
Invented the Holy Grail? No, the Legend of the Holy Grail goes back to a different version of English. It is older than our modern language. It is a fantastically old legend.
Yes. So if that classmate is listening, you know who you are, and I'm assuming you'd appreciate it if I don't mention your name. We were all younger and much more naive then.
Well, you don't know something until you do. So Mahatma Randy sends in also feedback on the feedback. I love that. It's so meta. Feedback on the feedback. On YouTube, he says, ooh, I like the respect for tradition argument. Good point about the EA maybe being less universal than it is in the B5 era. Possibly Africa was a late joiner. The alien pre-Minbari war you were trying to remember was the Dilgar. And good observation from Mr. McFadden. I hadn't really noticed the self-contained nature of the subplots. I'm missing context for some of these because it's been so long since I've heard our feedback episode.
Yeah, I think the respect for tradition, I think that was I'm trying to remember which one it was, but why would they do this in that age? And someone said, well, a lot of it was maintaining the tradition. I think it was actually in support of TKO, particularly. So
that's what I was thinking, was maybe TKO. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other one was that the comments, because we had, with the Earth Alliance and possibly Africa was a late joiner. It's because, yes, we were talking about that Earth Force with the Unified Earth Government, and then someone serving in wars in Africa and how to line those up. So we suggested that because it was pre-war, maybe that war helped unify more countries and bring more in.
And also the idea that I think we mentioned that just because you have a unified Earth does not necessarily mean that the unification is as happy as it should be. And there could still be conflicts within it. Yeah,
I think the EU is probably the best parallel. And I don't remember which of Mr. McFadden's he would be commenting on, because Mr. McFadden commented on everything and we love him for it.
But he knows what they're talking about, so that's good.
Yes. All right. And Mahatma Randy also had comments on Chrysalis from YouTube. So he says, JMS once described the Centauri Republic as Rome right on the cusp of decline. It always struck me as odd that they'd send the president and VP along on the same long-distance, weeks-long trip. In the US, we never really want both of them in the same place very often and only in controlled circumstances. The VP even has his own plane, or her own plane, as it would be at the moment, Air Force Two. The Earth Alliance is very clearly modeled on the US. Most other countries generally avoid having their big two together for security reasons, just common sense, but no matter, plot takes precedent.
I didn't even think about that, but he's absolutely right. It's the whole Picard and Riker, captain doesn't beam down the same missions that first officer beams down on. That, yeah, if something happens to one group, you don't want it to happen to both.
Yeah, so I think in this case we can kind of wiggle around that, saying, well, whatever the goal that they had was one of those special cases that needed them both. And because we're talking interstellar, maybe they did need just the one vessel. But as he points out, yes, the fact that Santiago and Clark started on the same vessel and then split up is a plot point. Continuing on, the BSG swearing in is more popularly known now, and to be fair, it was done better, but I never had a doubt that they were copying that scene from B5. And by the way, that B5 moment was actually modeled on the swearing in after Lyndon B. Johnson, I think it was, or after Kennedy was shot. That's the swearing in that they were deliberately copying.
And BSG is Battlestar Galactica, for those who forgot.
Yes. RDM, so Ronald D. Moore, who was the showrunner on Battlestar Galactica, was working for DS9 at the time. So when this B5 came out, he was on DS9. And was fairly vocal in retrospect about the limitations in writing for Trek. Yeah, especially in his time on Voyager. Mm-hmm. His ideas in Voyager that got shot down really became Battlestar Galactica. The people over there were certainly aware of B5, and it is a very striking oh smeg moment. And Randy didn't use Smeg, but we're family friendly. So that's what is here. To some extent, all of his versions of Galactica is a kind of a deliberate anti-Trek. Both are definitely based on the LBJ swearing in, but I have no doubt RDM was also referencing B5.
Well, that's cool. I would like to think that even though they're working for competing shows in 1995, that people on one show can be fans of the other show. You know, you don't have to have like an anti-mentality just because you're competing for ratings. So the idea that Ronald D. Moore would have been a fan of Babylon 5 and emulated it for Battlestar Galactica is neat.
It is. We have actually, John and I have recorded it. We have not released it in the sequence yet, but we have a pretty prominent guest star coming up who is a guest star on Babylon 5 because this individual was, well, this individual was very closely associated with Trek, but was invited on to Babylon 5 after repeatedly and voluntarily telling people in the fandom at Trek conventions, if you haven't checked out Babylon 5, do it. It's good. Right? It doesn't have to be us versus them. Both are great, like both.
Mm-hmm. Which we do.
Yeah. Randy continues, one of the character aspects of Londo that took me a long time to catch is that he's not after personal power. He's not adverse to it. Hey, if I get a better job and more prestige out of this, great. But even if he'll get nothing personal out of something, he'll still do it if he legitimately thinks it's good for his people. He's a greedy, lazy, cynical alcoholic who feels he's been done wrong by circumstances, but he is also a patriot who always puts the good of the Republic as he sees it above his own personal gain.
I like that insight. Yeah, I think Londo is not satisfied with his lot in life and would like something better, but not out of a desire for power, just out of a desire for, I really wish my life were not so crap.
Mm-hmm. Randy continues, I cannot overstate the impact that the death of Santiago had on the audience. I'm really glad you guys touched on it, because in grimmer modern times, this kind of thing is, well, still uncommon, but not remarkably so. But back when this episode aired, it was just unheard of. The good guys don't lose. They might have a setback, some adversity, not have an unqualified victory, or even trade punches to no real effect, but they didn't just uncategorically lose. And man, the B5 crew lost on every single level.
So one of the things about that idea the good guys don't lose, it's not only prominent in television, it was a rule in comic books for decades. The Comics Code decreed that evil could not win. And so our generation and the generation before ours who grew up from the late 50s into the early 80s, late 80s, I forget when they really stopped paying much attention to the Comics Code. We just grew up on comic storytelling where good guys always won, unless it was a cliffhanger for the next episode where the good guys would then win. And so the idea here where just things went to pot and there was no redemption is just not the kind of storytelling we're used to seeing.
Yeah, I think for that era, the closest I could think of to the bad guys winning is when Aquaman's comic was canceled on a cliffhanger. So you had that cliffhanger where the bad guys had the advantage, and there was no next issue. Although he did manage to wrap it up when he was hired by Marvel to write the last issue of Namor, when the previous issue of Namor, the Submariner, had not finished on a cliffhanger. So he basically took his intended Aquaman script and wrote part 2 with Namor, starting in dire straits with analogous villains. Anyway, Randy's comment continues. I remember watching this with my friend Heather, who liked the show well enough, mostly because Sinclair was studly. And at some point in the last 10 minutes or so, she started making nervous kind of ee noises and started squeezing a couch cushion. I asked what's wrong, and she said, I'm just nervous. I don't know how they're going to resolve this. I remember saying disappointingly because I wasn't fully in love with the show yet. And then EF1 blew up, and holy crap, the both of us were drop-jawed. We just sat there in silence, and she started rewinding the VCR and watched the episode again, which for Heather is kind of amazing. She doesn't watch much TV, and she never watches it twice. The next day I called up various friends who were following the show, some who liked it, some out of morbid curiosity, and all of them were simply drop-jawed. Several people who were not really interested became fans because it was so bold and risky. One guy who liked the show swore it off as being too misanthropic. My girlfriend at the time watched this without me just because I'd been babbling about the show, and she said, I really didn't understand half of what I saw, but I wanted to understand it, which never happens. Just the impact at the time was absolutely dumbfounded astonishment and disbelief. I apologize for making so many comments on here. Long podcast, important episode. There was just a lot to say. I'll probably delete a couple of them. Thank you guys for doing this.
Again, y'all, don't apologize. We love hearing the thoughts, especially whenever they're perspectives and stories like this that we've never heard before. I love that. I love the idea that this got people's attention. I mean, obviously, there's the comparison to real world things like 1963 with John F. Kennedy and such. The idea that that shook the nation to its core at the time. That this would have shaken the in-universe people to the extent that the viewers were also shaken by it. It's just neat to hear, because here we are 30 years later watching it from Cush. And you, Blaine, I think saw this in retrospect, like way after the fact, and it is part of your catch-up. Is that correct?
Yes, because I hadn't really seen any of this at broadcast. The only thing I'd actually regularly watched at broadcast was Crusade, but that's a story for much later down the road.
Okay. So yeah, lots of good stuff there with that story. Thank you very much, Randy. We go to Scott McFadden, or as he's known in other comments, Mr. McFadden, writing us an email about the season 1, episode 22, Chrysalis. Hey, the podcast is back. I've missed it. Great to hear you guys again. And we're going to be back again. I have a lot of thoughts about the end of season 1. Unfortunately, most of them have to do with how it lays the groundwork for season 2. So I don't want to say too much about it yet, even though I know that when you read this, you will have already seen all of the second season episodes. What I will say about Chrysalis is that it's obviously an episode of transitions, which is why the title is a good one. Agreed. And more meaningful than just being a reference to the literal chrysalis that Delenn enters. I remember hearing myself say that. I don't remember saying it because I never remember things, but I remember hearing myself say that on the discussion, is that the word chrysalis felt like it was referring to more than just the chrysalis. Scott continues, the assassination of President Santiago, the destruction of the Narn base, both signify that the series is moving into a more serious mode, a time when there will definitely be ongoing stories and long-term consequences for the characters and for the various races. Both the situation and the characters themselves are going to change. I think this is obviously one of the points in the show's history where we can tell that this is going to be more than just an episodic series of adventures. It's interesting to compare this to the Star Trek The Next Generation episode Conspiracy. That's the one where Picard and company find out that Starfleet Command has been taken over by parasitic aliens. That's the kind of thing that should be a big deal, with huge ramifications for the Federation. But it was all resolved in that one episode. Babylon 5 is not going to solve things so easily. Okay, to be fair to Conspiracy, the writers did intend for that to have farther consequences, not necessarily maybe with the conspiracy itself, but with the aliens. Those story ideas eventually became the Borg. But they did mean for that to have more things. Yeah,
the level of gore at the end of that episode, they got feedback from the stations that had picked it up saying, don't do that again or we're dropping the show. We're hearing from fans that they don't want that in their Star Trek. So they rewrote plans. But yes, that, again, as John said, to be fair to Conspiracy, that was not intended as a one-off. Now, you want to criticize Trek for doing things that should have implications as one-offs, go ahead. Like, Miles O'Brien experiences decades in an alien prison to the point where he's suicidal, and that's resolved in one episode. He's fine the next week.
Yeah, the Inner Light and that Deep Space Nine episode are like different versions of the same concept, but both of them should have farther consequences. And the Inner Light just got one romantic musical nod later on, and that's all.
Yeah, Picard remembered that he could play the flute, which isn't even a flute, it's a tin whistle.
Yeah.
And the prop doesn't actually play, so the sound guys didn't have to worry about it having weird things on the soundtrack.
It is so obvious he is not playing that whenever he's playing it. He's like, doo, 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 doo. Also, Kirk and Miramani should have had farther reaching ramifications. Kirk and Edith Keeler should have had farther reaching ramifications. I have not read it, Blaine, but I do believe that the conspiracy aliens do come back in a concerted way in the Treklit era of Star Trek books.
I do know from perusing Memory Alpha and Memory Beta about that that the race has a name which they did not have on screen that was hyperlinked.
Okay.
Yes, they come back at some point. I wasn't sure if it was in the Treklit section, which will be defined in our 0 episode of the Star Trek Reading Hour that you guys can listen to on September 8th, 2026.
Yes, slightly under 2 years away. Scott goes on. I think my Scott will go on. I think I'll leave any other comments I have until season 2 starts and we can get into the nitty gritty of the changes going forward. Ooh, I love the nitty gritty. I also wanted to just quickly mention that I also enjoyed the He-Man episode. I don't have a whole lot to say about it. It's our first mention of the He-Man episode. But it was fun kind of reliving the series. I actually have pretty fond memories of Filmation. They were a reliable producer of cartoons for a surprisingly long time. And I remember enjoying their stuff more than I did Hanna-Barbera in those days. Talk to you later, Scott. Reliable is a good word for Filmation.
Yep.
Regardless of your subjective reactions to the animation, they put out a lot.
Yes. And they might have invented the clip show. The earliest clip show episode of anything I could find is the final episode of the 1967 Spider-Man cartoon. Because the contract said, we will pay you X number of dollars for every episode you sell us. And when they got to the end and they had a little bit of money left over, they came up with the concept of the clip show because they could slap together one more episode and sell it cheap.
I don't remember Filmation being on Spider-Man.
Oh, I thought that was them. But anyway, the 1967 Spider-Man series finale, as far as I could tell, is the earliest clip show in TV history. I am very open to being corrected by people who know more about it. But when I checked any list of clip shows, I cannot find anyone recorded older than that. But they also did Rocket Robin Hood. Filmation must have been involved in that because alien creatures designed for Rocket Robin Hood show up in both the 1967 Spider-Man and in the Filmation Star Trek series from the 70s. Basically, animation created by Filmation for Rocket Robin Hood was then reused in both Spider-Man and in the Filmation Star Trek series.
Okay. I do know that various anime series used clip shows on a regular basis, but I'm not sure when that started and when it became a thing. But of course, American production habits are largely not influenced by Japanese production habits in the 1960s because communication is so low. So yeah.
So it's possible that it's not the first, but they may have been reinventing the wheel and invented it independently. Exactly.
But that's pretty neat. I had never really thought about the clip show. Filmation, they made Star Trek, they made He-Man. There's a lot out there from them.
Yes. We're actually not done discussing them either. We've recorded the She-Ra episode that will come.
Oh yeah, She-Ra.
And the Star Trek Reading Hour will be covering the Star Trek logs that adapt seems too loose, but the animated series inspired Alan Dean Foster's Star Trek logs.
Yes. We haven't read any of them yet, but we're doing that soon. I wonder if Mindy will watch animated Star Trek with me. I don't know if she will or not, but we'll see.
Possibly. I actually read the first 2 chapters of Star Trek Log 1 yesterday.
Okay.
The Beyond the Farthest Star is adapted into 5 chapters.
Alrighty.
All right. Our next email is from Ryan Wilson, also about Chrysalis and He-Man.
It's funny how you get all of the Ryan Wilsons. He's my cousin, damn it. Not really my cousin, my fake cousin, but still.
Well, actually, you know what? It really depends on how many generations removed.
Right.
Because however many people the human species started with, right, we all started in a pretty small thing in Africa. You go like once removed, twice removed, 3 times removed. If you get up to like 60 times removed, we probably are cousins with the entire planet.
When I have students with the last name Wilson, I always call them cousin until it annoys them.
Okay. Yes. So, hello to the crew now with Trey. The He-Man episode was interesting. I remember loving the show as a child. The first movie I saw in the theater was Masters of the Universe movie. But I haven't watched the show in decades. I didn't know that our beloved scribe had written episodes. Chrysalis, before we go on, yeah, that Masters of the Universe movie. You might enjoy it more if it's your first movie experience, because then there's that first-time experience of the spectacle.
It's made for kids. When it comes right down to it, it is made for kids. It is hard to enjoy with an adult sensibilities. I may have seen that in the theaters. I don't know.
I really wanted to, but I did not, because my parents really did not want to. They'd spoken to family friends who had gone with their kids and were basically told, don't spend money on it. So yeah, as much as I wanted to see that as a child, I probably would have loved it had I seen it as a child. My first exposure to it was on DVD. And the first DVDs came out when I was a young adult. So yeah, it's interesting to see that point in the careers of Frank Langella, Robert Duncan McNeil, and Courtney Cox. But it bears little resemblance to the He-Man I'm familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
Ryan continues, Chrysalis is one of my favorite episodes of the series, and I think it is the best season finale. The other season finales are good too, but this is my favorite. You have the culmination of the tension from the season and everything moves forward. There is so much going on at the same time. I am not surprised Sinclair couldn't get to Delenn's quarters to hear about the Battle of the Line. It's interesting to me that Londo seems to be aware that he should be working with Morden, but the chance to reclaim glory, whatever that means in his case, is too great a lure to resist. I appreciate this instead of him being naive and not realizing things could go horribly wrong. But like anyone who really wants something, he just moves forward anyway. What's the worst that could happen?
Honestly, though, what is the worst that could happen? Like, the notion that this could go horribly wrong is not something that occurs to him. Because why should it? I mean, generally speaking, though, when we're doing our things day to day and we have an interaction with one person, things don't go horribly wrong. They may not go as well as we expect them to, but we can deal with the fallout. We can deal with the consequences of a mistake.
Yeah, Londo made that choice with faith in the destination.
Mm-hmm.
But to use an analogy that's trying to minimize spoilers, because at this point we've seen some of the fallout from that.
Very little. Yeah,
he knew the destination he had in mind, that this is a way to get there. He didn't really look at the path. So Londo was, he's probably thinking, oh, we're going to get from A to B, but what do you mean we're going to trample that lovely garden on the way? Why don't we go around the garden and just take it a little bit longer? But can't go into too much more because spoilers. Brian says, I know this is the last episode where we see Catherine Sakai. As I am sure you know, there is a canon novel that covers her story afterwards. I do remember reading it, but I don't remember much about it. Is this something you plan to cover on the show during one of the breaks?
Short answer, yes. Longer answer.
Long answer, watch for that podcast to be released on Wednesday, September 8th, 2027.
Which novel is that?
Novel 9, To Dream in the City of Sorrows.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, it's the one I have just started reading.
I have started up novel 7, which so far is the first novel that really you don't want to read until you get to that part of the story. Because the other 6 novels we've done before that probably could have just been read whenever, more or less, with a few minor difficulties. But novel 7, wow, you really need to read that when it comes out.
Yes, I remember giving the spoiler warnings in the episodes as we were getting there. Novel 8 is similar. Novel 8 absolutely positively takes place between episode A and episode B. There is no question of where it fits in the timeline. It must be in that exact spot. It actually is. It takes place exactly in the recording break John and I have now. It's between the episode we have already recorded and the episode we will record next. And then 9 is also one that is making reference to spoilery things. So,
well, good, because I want continuity in my novels.
Yeah. So Ryan continues, the assassination of the president is still a surprise. Normally we don't see the good guys lose so obviously. It's early in the show, so there is plenty of time for a comeback or for things to get worse.
Definitely.
I wonder how viewers reacted to being given a promise of learning the truth of the Battle of the Line and then we don't get answers. I don't mind tension being strung out for a while as long as the answers eventually come. I am a fan of the Wheel of Time after all.
The Wheel of Time.
The answers come in the season 2 premiere. So Linear gives them to us.
Yeah, he does answer those questions. Getting them answered in the context of Sinclair's presence would have been good. But that, is what it is. He mentions being a fan of the Wheel of Time. Okay, listeners, if you like fantasy shows, fantasy as in pre-industrial setting, magic, that sort of thing, you need to go to Amazon and watch The Wheel of Time. Season 3 comes out in March. I am very excited. Seasons 1 and 2 are available. The end of season 1 had an impact from COVID, so the production of the last 2 episodes is a little bit less than they wanted it to be, but it's still a good ending. Season 2 comes back swinging, and I have nothing but good hopes for season 3. So go watch The Wheel of Time. Okay, that's your PSA for the day. Oh, also, lots of powerful women doing powerful things. Okay, go ahead.
Ryan continues. It was great hearing Trey Hooks on both of these episodes. For anyone not listening to the podcast that Blaine and Trey do together, you are missing out on some great film history talk. So that would be 99 years, 100 films when Trey and I are going through all the winners of the Academy Award for Best Picture. Our latest release at the time that this feedback comes out is Rain Man from 1988. So we are moving through the mandate. Our next recording is going to be American Beauty. And we did jump ahead and record Coda while I had 3 months of Apple TV free with the new phone.
You're a very good podcaster. Your dad lets you put out podcasts on Saturdays.
Ryan says, one aspect of this episode that amuses me, other than Sinclair's odd marriage proposal and those web-footed ducks, is Delen's insistence that Lanier was precise in his question to Kosh down to the word. No spoilers here, but we will actually hear that question eventually, and it's not that complicated. Important for the mythology.
We talked about that when we got there.
Yep. Important for the mythology, yes, but pretty easy to memorize. I wonder if JMS had something else in mind, but I figure that if so, Blaine will cover it down the line. I don't know if he changed the verbiage. I know that when that scene was written, they didn't know we were getting the cast change, so we get the answers earlier. So I don't know if he decided on the actual phrasing of the question or if he was just trying to be ominous and just drill home how important it is that you repeat it precisely.
Right.
And thankfully, Lanier was also able to memorize Kosh's answer.
Yes.
Yes, that was it. Good job, John. Onwards to season 2.
All right. Our next one is from Mahatma Randy. Okay, you're getting my cousin's feedback and I'm getting your friend's feedback, so that's fun. So this is on episode 1 of season 2. Okay, so we are finally getting into points of departure. He says, Randy's first annoying comment. The Agamemnon is an Omega-class destroyer, not a cruiser. The Hyperion was a cruiser. Earth Force ship classifications don't match U.S. Navy classifications. Were we saying the wrong thing, or was the show saying the wrong thing?
I don't know. I will just assume it was me, because I wasn't aware of the distinction, so I could have very easily made that mistake.
Okay. I know there's between cruisers and destroyers, and the what it says on the tin kind of makes a distinction. I just didn't remember us. Well, we may have just misspoken on the show. Anyway, Randy's second annoying comment. When this episode, first broadcast, Bruce Boxleitner, narration in the opening sequence was way too loud. His phrasing was strange too. The words were the same, but the places he chose to put emphasis were odd. They clearly had him re-record it for the second episode. This was something I noticed instantly, and most of my friends noticed it too. I actually had the original broadcast on VHS until about 10 years ago, but unfortunately losing all of that stuff. That is not an annoying comment. That is very cool to know. Because on the streaming release, we have the exact same opening sequence throughout, with the one exception of the shot of Delenn.
Yep.
Randy's third annoying comment. The idea of a hotshot fighter pilot is actually not a bad one. However, without getting into any spoilers, I think it's the kind of thing that would have been much better suited to season 1 than to season 2. I can see that.
Yep, so can I.
I can see the character fitting better into the episodic nature of season 1 and having like maybe one spotlight episode along the way. I first saw Robert Ressler in the 1986 film Vamp, starring Grace Jones as the titular Vamp. Very good horror comedy. That said, again, without getting into spoilers, I feel like they could have done a better job with the casting. I have read that JMS wanted to have a Japanese spider pilot, very much driven by the code of Bushido. The network wanted a white guy.
Yeah, JMS also wanted someone in his 40s and not his 20s. But.
Right. I had never heard prior to your previous episode that JMS had wanted the reporter lady on the station. That would have been awesome, wouldn't it? Randy's fourth annoying comment. Randy, why are you putting yourself down, man? What the hell happened to my first annoying comment? What was my first annoying comment? I can't remember. Okay. Randy's fifth and final annoying comment. I remember my friend Heather and me both being a little disappointed by this episode. Coming on the heels of the season 1 finale, it was definitely a step down in terms of quality and storytelling and everything. And I genuinely like Boxleitner. He is oddly stagey during this whole episode. Like when he says, he is great counsel, I know it. It is a really good example of how quick and deductive his mind is. But delivery is just strangely forced and artificial. And I really did not like the ritual of having to give Abraham Lincoln's speech for reasons I cannot explain without spoiling stuff. Suffice to say, though, I thought that it served primarily as an artificial time limit for the episode, just to give things a little more urgency. Didn't need that. We both knew that Sinclair was not coming back, but we were hoping you'd get at least 1 or 2 scenes. Yeah, a departure scene would have been good. I realize, like he says, I understand why they didn't do that now, but I still feel kind of cheated by not getting at least a scene or 2 of him being really angry back on Earth when he's told he's being permanently reassigned. That's a quibble, I know. Agreed. I actually agreed with that entire sentiment. The stuff about Sheridan feeling artificial, I kind of have to agree. Going back and rewatching the beginning of season 2 after seeing season 2, 3, and into 4, Sheridan feels weird when he first comes on the station.
Yeah, they were leaning a little more into the kind of character that he was known for playing rather than who he is here. And to be fair, we do eventually get the scenes of Sinclair finding out he's reassigned. It's just in the comics. We
do have comics coming, yes, and Sinclair is involved.
Yeah. Yeah, we have that. That episode has been recorded, but we'll more on that later because someone actually asks about it. So I think it was Randy that asks about it later on.
So Randy goes on, I thought Ivanova already knowing him and the 2 of them being on friendly terms was a little too convenient. It was basically there as yet another avenue of exposition. It worked fine, but it just seemed a little forced. If I had to describe this episode in one word, that one word would be a little forced. And I'm bad at math. I can see your point on Ivanova. I think having Ivanova as a counterpoint to Garibaldi, though, is a good storytelling choice. Maybe they could have done that storytelling choice and that counterpoint a little bit differently, but I kind of liked the pleasantness of Ivanova as opposed to the rocky nature of his initial relationship with Garibaldi. But that's just me. Going on, in any event, Sheridan's performance becomes considerably more relaxed and confident almost immediately. The show does ramp up and complexity and stuff really quickly. And on the whole, the second season is, in my opinion, much better than the first. Amen. And I did not think the first season was bad at all. Okay, I'll come out and say it. I thought it was a little bit bad. That is purely subjective. There are parts of the first season that I look back on and go, and I totally understand why somebody now trying to get into Babylon 5 might not even finish The Gathering. But as I've said online while promoting this podcast, the hype is real. Give it into the second season because it's worth the time. I don't know if you have thoughts on that looking back as a experienced viewer now.
Yeah, the first season wasn't bad, but it wasn't good enough that it would have made me continue. Like I said, I got season 1 as a birthday or Christmas gift because I asked for it. And then season 2 was just because my parents remembered I asked for season 1, so they picked up season 2. I would have stopped at season 1 if they hadn't done that. And I am so very glad that they did because of what this show becomes. So yeah, season 1 has bad episodes. I don't think there's enough of that to make the whole season as a whole bad, but it's also, I can totally see why it doesn't grip people enough to keep going.
I think if you get to Chrysalis, there's enough in that finale to draw you into season 2. But getting to Chrysalis might be difficult for a modern viewer.
Yep.
Okay. Randy says, the new tone is much more conducive to audience than the tone of the first season was. And I had not thought of it in terms of it being a pilot, but damn it, Blaine, you're right. As ever, thank you guys for doing this. I really appreciate it and enjoy listening to it. And I hope I am not monopolizing the comments. Everybody gets their space, Randy. Take yours.
Yep. You can't monopolize something because you can't. Posting yours does not prevent anyone else from posting theirs.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So John's cousin Ryan emails us again. And now season 2. Points of departure was never not going to feel weird, but then changing the lead actor will do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a decent way to introduce Sheridan to the audience and show he's a different commander, but that we might want to be suspicious of him too. I've always found the Mambari upset at the loss of the Black Star to be a pretty hypocritical position. There was a war. Why wouldn't humans fight back? If they didn't like it, then don't have a war. I guess it's true to life, but it's still a pretty foolish position to take, in my opinion.
Okay, I had similar thoughts.
Yeah, It does seem bitter, but I can also see that eye for an eye thing just escalating and escalating. Go, oh, you hurt us in our act of massacring you? Well, yeah.
Yeah. There's this sort of Klingon way of, we were at war, you fought well. I respect you as a warrior. But that's not how we tend to do things. You know, we were at war, and the reasons we were at war with you, even though the war is over, we're still kind of holding on to those reasons. And you killed us so much while we were trying to fight for our reasons that we're going to resent you hard. And it's not maybe the most rational and emotionally healthy and balanced perspective, but it is how we tend to be. And I disagree with it on a rational level, but like you said, it's true to life.
Yeah, I think his comment that it's true to life, but still pretty foolish is the perfect way to describe it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Ryan continues, the nature of the revelations of the truth behind the Minbari's surrender at the Battle of the Line is weird. Lanier just tells them what happened. The end. I figured this had to do with Michael O'Hare leaving, and that if he had stayed on the show, we would have received our answers in a couple of episodes once the chrysalis ended. Oh well, it's making the best of a bad situation. Had Michael O'Hare stayed, we would have apparently gotten those answers from Delenn in episode 8 of season 2.
Right.
Instead of the exposition dump in episode 1.
And then it would have felt like insights into a character arc instead of, like you said, an exposition dump.
All right, so Ryan continues on discussing Revelations. This episode feels like it was intended to be the second part of last season's finale. I guess that makes sense. It's last time they had to introduce the new captain. All the plots move a bit forward. Blaine can verify, but I believe this episode is one of the few times we actually see the Earth president. Both Clark and Santiago, while important to the series, rarely appear.
I was actually kind of surprised to see him there.
Yeah, we really don't see him much at all. Santiago especially was just he was one of the production staff. They didn't even hire an actor because he was just a headshot.
Yeah, I think it was just a photo in the election back in the beginning of the season, right?
Yep. Yeah, and we don't see much of Clark at all. So
it's really crazy that the first episode of the season is the election and the last episode of the season is the assassination. That's a crazy bookend that is only just now popping into my head.
Yep. But it's also a sign of how much planning went into the structure of this series.
Yeah. Wow.
All right, so Ryan continues, we see Londo take another step towards darkness. He could have ended the relationship with Morden here, even though he owes a favor. I can see him telling Morden what he wants to know. He doesn't technically know what will happen or why Morden is interested. We, the viewers, don't really know either. But it is another step in the wrong direction, and it's becoming harder and harder for Londo to just go along with this and pretend nothing is wrong. I like the Council's reaction to Delenn walking in with her new form, mostly stunned, and Sheridan seems to be interested as well. He confirms this to his sister later in the episode. Delenn doesn't react as if anything is the matter.
Mm.
It's all fun and games until someone quotes the prisoner. Until next time.
Didn't you quote the prisoner in your last thing, Ryan? Didn't you end with "be seeing you"? I'm scrolling back. It wasn't his last one, but there was definitely one of them. Yes, yep. He did. His October email. Okay, Ryan, I'm on to you. I'm on to your shenanigans.
Yes.
All right. So from Scott McFadden, his first name is Mr. All right. He is talking about episodes 1 and 2 of season 2. So we both, again, have points of departure and revelations. He saith, well, episode 3 of the podcast ought to be dropping tomorrow morning as I write this. So I suppose it's time that I get around to commenting on episodes 1 and 2. The change in tone is obvious immediately. This is both because we're obviously starting to have more ongoing plot threads and also because Bruce Boxleitner's personality, at least as much as we can tell of it through a television screen, seems quite different than Michael O'Hare's. I'm not sure exactly how to put the difference into words. I don't want to say that he's more lighthearted exactly, but maybe his background is lighter, more comedic adventure series makes him seem somewhat more approachable, if that's the right word. As you will remember from my previous comments, I was never on board with the frequent criticism of Commander Sinclair as too stiff or unlikable. I thought that O'Hare was doing a fine job in the role and that the character was quite compelling. But as we now know, circumstances made it impossible for him to continue, and there's no denying that Captain Sheridan comes across as more ebullient. I think the best word to describe Sinclair, especially in contrast to Sheridan, is reserved. He was just a bit more reserved. He kept himself a bit more close to the vest.
He is, and I think he feels to me like a more realistic military commander.
Mm-hmm.
In that sense. I don't have a lot of direct interaction with the military, but the people in the military I know say like personal emotions are left in your quarters.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about the job and the decisions, and that's what Sinclair was bringing, or O'Hare was bringing to it as Sinclair. So,
also the shift in tone could also be partly attributed to the fact that they had a production gap between seasons, because shows do that. That's why they're called seasons. So just coming in with season 2, there's just a fresh new energy, and with the new changing character, I can see how there'd just be a different feel. Scott continues, ironic considering that Sheridan is going to deal with much more serious and dramatic events than Sinclair ever did. It's just too bad that the timing didn't allow them to film an actual scene of Sinclair getting his new orders. Agreed.
Yeah. And as we said, that scene does exist in the comments
in the comics.
Yeah, comics that John and I have covered. We've recorded it. It's going to be coming out.
We will have covered it.
Yes. Yeah, that episode will come out on March 22nd of 2025.
During the next production break. Or release break, rather.
Yes, after season 2, episode 13. The next is the comics, issues 1 to 4.
One thing that I've always wondered about, knowing that a lot of Sheridan's story was originally planned to be Sinclair's story, is what the original intention was for Catherine Sakai. We know that season 1 ended with Sinclair and Sakai getting engaged. And we know that a large part of Sheridan's character is that he is haunted by the death of his wife. Was the original plan that Catherine would be killed off? I don't know if GMS ever addressed that, but I wonder. Okay, so we've already talked about the fact that novel 9 is about Catherine. I don't know how much of that is based on JMS's intentions, though.
His original intentions would be that she would be through or go through extreme trauma, basically destroying her personality, and that Sinclair had the choice to restore it, but it would have to put her through another batch of trauma again. And he couldn't do that to her, so he let her live her new life with a new personality. And that would have been the end of their relationship. So it would have been like the death of personality equivalent that we talked about for the death penalty, although not because she'd committed any crime. So that was the original plan.
Wow. And knowing the storytelling purpose for that thing is okay. Also, I kind of hate that, and I'm glad we didn't get it. That feels a little too close, like fridging your girlfriend. I mean, I'm not making a harsh judgment on JMS. I personally am kind of glad we didn't get that.
Yep, and it would have been done because she knew things, and yeah, they would have been extracting it to use the information against Sinclair. It's briefly described in the outline in volume 15 of the script books. So.
Okay. Well, I can't wait to see what her actual life is in novel 9 instead. Hopefully it's not that. Okay. Going on, I did not know, or at least did not remember, that the opening credits for season 2 were not changed at first in order to hide the details of Delen's transformation. That was good thinking. Although it must have been confusing for the original viewers to keep seeing Michael O'Hare in the credits when he was obviously not there anymore. That seems like an incongruity. Would they have left Michael O'Hare in the credits for the first 4 episodes of season 2?
Yeah, that's the way I remembered it on the DVDs. Another poster contradicts this, but I haven't seen the DVDs in years. It's easy enough to check. I just haven't. But even in the script notes, JMS said that, yes, they used the season 1 opener for the first 2 episodes because of this. But then we've also had Randy comment about how Sheridan's voiceover was re-recorded and whatnot. So I it's easy enough to check the DVDs, but the broadcast is much harder to check about who's misremembering.
And replacing a visual of Delen is just as easy as replacing a visual of Sinclair with Sheridan. So that's entirely possible that was done. But yeah, that might be one of those elements of history that's lost to the actual,
Well, I'm sure someone out there still has the originals on VHS and can actually verify what happened. But.
Okay, you heard, we just mentioned you. Go check right in. There was something he just said that I was going to comment on too, but I can't remember now what it was. And Scott goes on, and I have certainly never heard that the original intention was to have Delen's gender change in addition to her appearance. That would have really been something. But remembering what attitudes were like in 1994, I do wonder how it would have gone over. Honestly, I think it would have gone over a lot more smoothly in 1994 because transgender was not a political hot button. It was something that, like, I think most people were vaguely or not aware of. So to just have a character change gender in 1994, especially an alien character, probably would not have been that big of a deal.
Maybe not. I do know that the Star Trek people, when they had two women kiss, they were trill. So they were male and female when they were married. They re-encounter each other. Two women kiss on screen. They got a lot of negative feedback from that.
Yes, but that's not a trans issue. That's a gay issue. And that was a big thing in the 90s.
Yeah. So, yeah, although the trans community have latched on to the trill because it was in a lot of ways the best representation they had, even though that was it wasn't a concept created in there, but it was the closest thing they had because they were just so horribly represented in general. The only other mentions of trans, there's WKRP handles it okay in a couple episodes, but most of the time it's used as a punchline in this is icky kind of joke, which I don't like. The delightful story about the intern I alluded to on Deep Space Nine, when someone was calling, apparently someone phoned in and the intern was the one who was supposed to answer. And the woman was complaining about how seeing these women kiss is going to destroy her daughter. And he said, would you have been okay with it if one woman pulled out a phaser and shot the other one? And she said, yes, that would have been fine. Well, then I think you need to ask yourself who it is that's ruining your daughter.
Yeah. Now, I would want to clarify that, of course, the Trill can represent trans issues. Of course, that's built into the concept of the alien species. When I watched it on air and my memory of conversations around it at the time, the fact that the character went from male to female in the story was not what was being talked about. The fact that the female then kissed a woman was what was talked about. And that was, yeah.
Yep. So yeah, the writers on that were not thinking of the Trill as a trans allegory, and they've been kicking themselves for not seeing it now. But like you said, it just wasn't at the point in the public consciousness that it would have crossed their minds. I think one of the reasons WKRP did it a couple of times better in the later seasons than in the earlier one is because the showrunner that they hired for season 2, who was in the writer's room to the end, actually came out as trans. So credited as Peter Turokve, that's the dead name for PJ Turokve, who came out in 2006. So.
All right. Scott says, I'm afraid that even a fair number of science fiction fans would have had trouble with it. Sadly, science fiction fans are not always as progressive a bunch as we might like to think. This is true. It is weird how you can go into an area of fandom about something that is very progressive and see a whole bunch of nuts.
Yeah.
I still remember the uproar when Dax kissed another woman on Deep Space Nine. Maybe JMS will return to the idea of changing to lens gender in the reboot if it manages to get off the ground. If. Your conversation in one of those episodes about, by the time this episode comes out, we will know. It just made me sad because we have not heard anything about the B5 reboot in so long. It's probably just not existing anymore.
The latest comments from JMS are basically that LA is still shut down and they're not doing a lot of new productions. So, yeah, there's no final decision made about whether it's coming or not, but I am less optimistic with each passing day.
Yeah. Londo is beginning his transition away from lovable buffoon to something much darker. What's most interesting about this to me is that at his point, he still had a choice. He's clearly a bit unsettled by how much power Morden has at his command and is visibly startled at the notion that completely destroying the Narn homeworld is a realistic possibility. And yet when Jakar tells him that the Narn are sending a ship to Zahadum, he still lets Morden know about it. He could have kept silent, but he didn't. Whatever Londo's misgivings, they weren't strong enough for him to back away from Morden. Yeah. And honestly, I think he's still at the point where he just doesn't realize how far this is going to go. He's playing along. He didn't anticipate there being such much devastation. But Morden kind of tries to allay his misgivings. You know, this was just a necessary step, but it's fine. We're going to be okay. But yeah. Scott says, I think this is the first mention of Zahadum. The similarity of that name to Khazad-dûm was what first prompted me to start looking for echoes of Tolkien in Babylon 5. And once you start looking, they're easy to find. I never thought about that. But yeah, Zahadim and Khazad-dûm are very, very similar, probably intentionally so.
Yeah, there's loads and loads of Lord of the Rings references when you start looking. He's absolutely right about that.
Well, I've rambled on enough for now, I think. Looking forward to your thoughts on the rest of the season. Scott.
So our next comment is from a first-time commenter on our YouTube channel, specifically on Season 2, Episode 2 here. That's Klaatu Barada 579, which, like the reference to The Day the Earth Stood Still with Klaatu Barada Nikto. Yes. Unless that's a reference to the three members of the audience in Jabba's palace who are named Klaatu and Barada and Nikto. But anyway, my favorite sci-fi series ever. I love how it felt so episodic for most of the first season. Then suddenly you start to realize it's not episodic. There are just so many loose ends being cast out in the first season, you can't see how they tie together. And then the show spends the rest of the 3 seasons tying them all into one story, well acted, well written, and amazing. Look, considering the shoestring budget, who are you? What do you want?
Welcome to the podcast, Klaatu. Very glad to have you on board. Okay, Randy's back. And you're gonna get in trouble, hey now. Sheridan's line, oh, this is about episode 2. Sheridan's line about, I go to tell her something and she's not there and then I remember, is just a great bit of writing and a nice bit of acting. Talking about his wife, of course, and how he is still missing her. Obviously, still missing her. It's still very fresh. And yeah, obviously anyone out there who has had a loss of a family member knows that, like, you keep on thinking, I need to tell such and such, or I need to go and do the thing with or for such and such. And it's just your brain. It's basically the mental equivalent of a phantom limb. He goes on to say, I don't want to sound regressive or anything, but the 1990s in the US was a very, very different time for sexual mores. Merely introducing a gay character in a positive way was kind of a death sentence for a show. Even perennial hits like LA Law introduced Amanda Dono as bisexual at the end of the 5th season in the 90s. First lesbian kiss on American TV, and they got so many complaints and broadcasters pulled in the episode and advertisers refusing to advertise on it, and boom, the character's off the show at the start of the next season. The first Ellen sitcom got decent ratings for most of its run, but when she outed herself in one episode, arguably it killed the show, though it lasted another year. Basically, it wasn't until Will and Grace 4 or 5 years later that the curse was broken. Yes, although I think it's fair to say that in the 94-95 era, we are in this phase where using gay characters humorously and comedically, not as the butt of jokes, but just talking about gayness in the context of humor, was a lot more accepted and, or at least a lot less daring than actually having homosexual behavior shown on the screen as far as kissing and such. So it's a weird transition.
Yeah, I think it was the age where you could get away with it if you had an extremely effeminate male character who never had any public displays of affection on screen.
Never show them. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. Then he goes on to say, in a trans character, that would have been an order of magnitude more difficult, even on an SF show. For a low-rated, low-budget, first-run syndicated show, it would have killed it. People would have rage quit in droves. The show may not even have finished the second season. It simply wasn't feasible at that time to do that on an American show at the time and not reap the whirlwind. So I'm kind of glad they weren't able to make the voice work. Because now we have 110 episodes of awesome, and otherwise we would have had 30-ish episodes of a quickly forgotten series. Correct me if I'm wrong, was there a point at which JMS was thinking of making the Minbari a hermaphroditic species as a fallback position in between pilot and first episode?
I have heard a lot of fans talking about how they were going to be hermaphroditic or androgynous, but it's not in any of the notes that I've seen from JMS himself at this point. I have heard that he's made comments like that at conventions at the time, but none of it is documented in the books I have in front of me, so I don't know how accurate that memory is for people.
And obviously it's speculation. Neither one of us knows. I'm still going to respectfully disagree. I don't think it would have gone down as harshly because I don't think people were thinking about it the way people are thinking about it now. And we had Gender Bender on X-Files. We had women dressed as men for visual effect in things like The Cage and in The Gathering, where a, female actor is dressed as a male character. So I just honestly am not sure, especially since it's not a human transgender process where we have all of the things that we associate with that, with the little, boy or girl growing up and then going through the change and having to associate them with being a man or woman, the reverse. All of those things wouldn't have been present in the show. I honestly just don't think it would have been that big a deal. And Lieutenant Dax constantly referring to herself as having been Curzon. Cisco calling her old man. That is the same effect in the past tense. So I just honestly don't, but I could be wrong and we'll never know because it's hypothetical.
Yeah, I think it would have taken a hit. The only thing we can't say for sure is how big that hit would have been.
Mm-hmm. Randy goes on to say, I like Garibaldi's I Don't Know You. That was a great moment too. Oh, because he's talking to Sheridan. He's like, I don't know you. Because he did know Sinclair, and so much of Garibaldi's story on the station was the fact that he knew Sinclair and they were friends. He says, I'm kind of glad they didn't expand on the life energy bond thing. What's that?
About how it was part of Sheridan's life energy that kept Garibaldi alive. So there's supposed to be some kind of bond. But
that it might have been continuous instead of, okay.
Yeah.
An element that people don't really bring up about Natoth #1 is that she was pretty damn funny. She was. It's understated most of the time, but I'm not even entirely sure that some of her frustration and occasional eye rolls and stuff like that were in the script or it was the actress's invention. Whatever it is, the second or third time you watch the show, you notice she's actually pretty funny, which is remarkable for a character who has little to no sense of humor. I like that. The fact that she is such a straight character, the actress kind of plays for laughs. And I agree. I like that.
Yeah, it's comparable to Michael Dorn as Worf, where he will make you laugh by playing it absolutely straight.
Mm-hmm.
So the next comment is on YouTube from Simon Giles. He says, the original broadcast had the season 2 titles for episodes 1 and 2, but showing original Delenn with new Delenn from the next week onwards. They didn't use season 1 titles at all. DVD versions use the titles with new Delenn for episodes 1 and 2 for some reason, but streaming episodes have been fixed. See, I had a memory of being confused and making sure I put in the right disc because I thought it was the season 1 titles on my DVD. I don't know. It could be the Mangala effect. Yes, I did that on purpose. It's an X-Files reference. Yeah, I could easily be misremembering. One of these days I could pop in the DVDs. It might also be something that changed in different pressings of the DVDs, so 2 DVD sets might be different. I don't know.
What he's describing is what's on the current streaming.
Yeah.
So what's possible here is that the commenter is using what is currently available as the basis for what happened originally, or not. I don't know.
Yeah.
Mindy also chimed in about the change. You're talking about Sheridan, right? Yeah, she says, I like that I was afraid they would just slide him in and gloss over the relationships, like with Catherine and such, and Garibaldi and everything. I like they made a distinctive change, especially since the two looked so similar. Okay, our next bit is from Joachimsthal, Matthew Joachimsthal. I'm going to go with Joachimsthal for the last name.
Okay.
Matthew, let us know if that's wrong. Writing an email about episode 2, season 2. Greetings, Blaine and John. While listening to another B5 podcast some years ago, the audio guide to Babylon 5, I think I heard some of that one. The discussion for 322 included something about Kosh sounding like Jar Jar Binks and a challenge for someone to put Binks's face on Kosh's encounter suit. Like the things he says sounding Jar Jar Binks-ish, because his voice doesn't sound like Binks.
Yeah, I think it's the statements themselves.
The words themselves. I was greatly amused at the idea, so I decided to do just that. The attached image is the result. I posted it to Facebook, so I get a laugh about it every year when it comes up in my memories. Okay, yeah, you can't read that out loud, I guess. Okay, I have seen the image you sent. It has a quote from a future episode, so I'm not going to read it out loud, but that's pretty funny. Okay. Alrighty. So Matthew goes on to say, I am enjoying the podcast a great deal, especially getting the perspective of a new viewer. The audio guide had periodic check-ins from someone that had not seen it previously, but that perspective every episode is fun to hear. I had some feedback I meant to send in season 1 when there was a profound statement made by Commander Sinclair. I have since forgotten what it was, but it played into his destiny and was a sort of the pattern was a part of the pattern I had not seen previously. I'll have to go back and watch it again to find it. I'm pretty sure it was right before a mid-season break. Cheers, Matthew. Thank you, Matthew. Matthew is a first-time writer?
As far as I know, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for writing and welcome to the show.
And actually, before we move on, so Matthew, please email us. That is a great image. You're right that it does spoil the season 3 finale. With your permission, I would like to use that as the podcast episode image in podcast players when we get to that episode. So if you're okay with it, I will snag it and we'll use that so that listeners can hit that and see the image when the time comes.
When the time comes.
Yeah, so please fire off an email. Let us know if you're okay with that.
Yes.
All right, so our next set of comments came from Mahatma Randy on YouTube about Season 2, Episode 3. So this one is The Geometry of Shadows. I first saw an advanced screening of The Gallery at a Volcon in Atlanta quite a while before it aired. I'm not sure exactly how long, but substantial amount of time. Not a year, but probably 6 months or so. That sounds about right because it aired in February, I believe, and was completed in late August. At some point several months after that, eTelevision did an hour special hosted by Scott Baio promoting the show. It showed a lot of behind-the-scenes things as introduced characters come and gave very broad outline of what the show was about. It was very superficial and punctuated by Scott occasionally saying, "I want my Babylon 5" in the same cadence as the early MTV slogan. The Green Leader Drazi, I assume to be Wayne Alexander, gives my absolute favorite performance of an alien in his time on B5. And someone replied to this comment saying that it was Kim Strauss, not Wayne Alexander. Watch the face when the Green Leader says, "Station will be quiet again." Watch his eyes, the expression on his face, the emphasis he puts on the word quiet. It is just absolutely hilarious. Like, he does not give a damn about the conflict whatsoever. The only thing he cares about is how freaking noisy it is. Every time I see it, I laugh. And he says, "Snake, tree trunk, and rope is hilarious."
Snake, tree trunk, and rope.
Yeah, I think that was because at the end of that episode, you said that you wanted more shadows in an episode titled Geometry of Shadows. And I said that, yeah, you wanted an elephant, but all they gave us was a snake, a tree trunk, and a rope.
Oh, yes, yes. Okay. Very good, very good. Scott McFadden writes in about the Geometry of Shadows as well. He says, "Hi, fellas." Hi, Scott. "I had never thought of the Geometry of Shadows as a particularly standout episode. Not to say that I thought it was bad, but it seemed a bit run-of-the-mill to me. It introduces Lord Arifa, who is going to appear again, but he's only a minor part of the episode. The main storylines struck me as kind of routine. Elric and the Technomages seem like a one-off mysterious folk who drop scary hints about the future, and the Drazi fighting each other plot struck me as a typical "these weird aliens are weird and alien" storyline. But listening to the podcast helped me to see the importance of this one to the larger story, and I was able to see some of the things I had missed before. Okay, I will totally agree with Randy from a first viewing perspective. When this happened, and this was the one that Van Allen Plexico wanted to be on, I didn't get it. I didn't understand. I didn't realize anything about why this would be important in the long run, except for, like, hints. Going back and rewatching it when our podcast came out, having seen the rest of 2 and 3, yeah. The things that make it important are mostly buried in dirt, but they're really there. Going on. Even though Londo is letting his ambition get the better of him, in this episode he is still mostly a comic figure. Even though he and Rifa are toying with the idea of overthrowing the Emperor, treason as Londo himself notes, his quest to get the Technomages to endorse him is treated in a light-hearted way. He is his familiar blustering self, full of misplaced confidence in his own ability to handle a situation that he really doesn't understand. He pays for that hubris, but in a comedic way, and is able to resolve the situation by simply stammering out an insincere apology. In retrospect, this is a warning that Londo would have done well to pay attention to. It's interesting, yes, because there's so much here that alludes to much darker, more serious things to come. But yes, we're still in a comedic Londo part of the story.
Yeah, London has such a long road ahead of him, and it's delightful to watch. Even when you're cringing and going, no, don't go that way, go this way.
By the way, this is the first time that it struck me in all the years I've watched the show how odd it is that the Centauri call themselves a republic. They have an emperor. Good point. Well said. Is that a democratically elected emperor for life kind of thing? That's a Transformers quote. Blaine mentioned the Easter egg in the conversation between Londo and Veer of the person passing behind Veer during that scene. I appreciate you pointing that out, which I had never noticed before. But I am more struck by Veer's discussion of fate. In particular, his comments of the currents that we think will make us stronger are actually the currents that will destroy us. That dynamic is certainly going to be seen in what's going to happen over the next few seasons. Great writing on JMS's part that what will seem like a comedy interlude is actually a pretty valuable piece of wisdom that also struck me really hard in the review. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's always nice to see Michael Ansara and to hear his powerful voice. It's too bad that Elric, nice Michael Moorcock shout out, was a one-off character. It would have been nice to see him again. I know we see Technomages more in the novels. I don't know if we see his particular character again.
Yeah, I haven't read those novels yet, so I don't know. That character does not appear on screen. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't know if he's certainly fair game for the novels that are coming.
On another note, it is funny how even though the last episode ended with the shocking revelation of Delenne's new form, she doesn't appear in this episode and nobody says a word about her. You would think it would be the talk of the station. That's what happens, I guess, when you have a large number of plot lines and characters to deal with. Well, we'll see Delenn again soon enough. On to the next episode, Scott.
And Hagbard Celine 7118 comments again. This comment is from December 15th, so it's the most recent one. Also on Geometry of Shadows, saying, the Drazi plot of this episode is fantastic, and it's what I remember most from the episode, despite whatever the A plot is. So yeah, that the green-purple, it is at the point where if audiences are bored at conventions, you will often have one person shout out green, and then you get green, purple, going back and forth.
Yeah. I have not been to one of those situations, but I can imagine that happening.
Yeah.
All right. Now we get to our discussions on episode 4, which is A Distant Star. This first one is from Scott McFadden. Hi, guys. Hi, Scott. It's funny how different people react to actors in different ways. Take Russ Tamblyn, for example. To John, he's Dr. Jacoby from Twin Peaks. To my mind, to my wife, he's Riff from West Side Story and is primarily a singer and dancer. I haven't seen West Side Story in long enough to even remember him in that. Whereas to me, he will always be the hero of one of my absolute favorite kaiju films, War of the Gargantuas.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one, and I haven't seen West Side Story since Trey and I covered it for our podcast with Paul Spataro as our guest, who we've heard in this series as a guest on The Gathering.
And I only watched the original Japanese version of that. I don't think I saw the Americanization of it. And I don't think he's in the Japanese version. I could be wrong. As Russ Tamblyn listed very first, though. Is this the one that had Americans in the Japanese cast?
I don't know. I know Godzilla or Gojira did.
Well, Gojira had, they redid a lot of that for the American release with Americans.
Yeah, the American version is the only one with, why am I suddenly blanking on Perry Mason's real name? I just had it.
Yes, he is. He is Dr. Paul Stewart in the Japanese version, but he has his Japanese is dubbed by Goro Mutsumi. I need to go back and watch that again because I forgot. I don't even know if I noticed he would have been 30 years younger, so I might not even have recognized him. Huh.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Why am I blanking on the name of the actor who played the original Perry Mason? He was in Rear Window. That's going to bug me until I look it up.
Oh, wow.
Raymond Burr. That's it.
Raymond Burr?
Yes.
Okay. I have Dr. Paul Stewart, played by Russ Tamblyn, on my screen, and I don't recognize him. Like, knowing that he's Russ Tamblyn as a fact is fine, but I don't recognize him as Russ Tamblyn. He looks so different when he's that much younger. Wow. Okay. Thank you for pointing that out because I did not even know that connection. That's great. He says, a man of many personas. Looking at his filmography, for a while in the 60s, he was going back and forth between musicals and westerns. He's also, incidentally, Amber Tamblyn's father. However you know him, it was nice to see him here. He does a good job portraying an old friend of Sheridan's, and he has an air that makes it believable that he has some bawdy adventures in his past. We're still getting to know Sheridan, so bringing in someone who reminds him of when he was expecting his career to go in a different direction is an effective way to flesh out his character. I'm not, okay, that's Amber Tamblyn. Okay.
Yeah, I'm looking through her filmography too, trying to find something I might have seen her in.
We finally see more of, you know what I remember her from? Isn't she Joan of Arcadia? Yes. I remember when Joan of Arcadia was on, my mind just put this together. I remember linking her as an actress to Twin Peaks and Dr. Jacoby there. But I had completely forgotten that connection because that's been 20 years ago now.
Okay.
We finally see more of Delenn after her complete absence last episode. It's an interesting touch that her transformation is just as confusing to the other Minbari as it is to the humans. We've already seen that Delenn has her issues with the rest of the Great Council, so it's good for the show to acknowledge that in this case as well. She is working toward her own goals that may not align with the rest of the Minbari government. You mentioned the scene between Sheridan and Garibaldi, where Sheridan is a bit impatient with Garibaldi for giving him all of the details of the string of thefts as an example of the difference in command style between Sinclair and Sheridan. I interpreted it a bit differently. I saw Sheridan's shortness with Garibaldi as another sign that he was feeling resentful at being in a desk job rather than commanding a starship like Jack Maynard was. Okay.
Yeah, that hadn't occurred to me, but that's a totally valid interpretation.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if I had a different reaction on first viewing versus recent viewing, and I can't recall. It's not long after this that Ivanova talks to Sheridan about whether his head is really in the game as captain of the station, and I assume that his short temper was one of the signs she had noticed. Could be both, I suppose, but just thought I'd mention it. Yeah, I agree. Probably is at least some of the other, if not both. I wonder how Robert Rustler felt when he was reading this script and saw Keffer apparently lost in hyperspace. Man, I just got this job. They're killing me off already. It's too bad that we won't be seeing any more scripts from DC Fontana. She really was one of the best TV science fiction writers of her time. I'm glad she got a chance to contribute to Babylon 5. Until we meet again, Scott. Agreed. Yeah. Seeing Dorothy's name on here was a very pleasant surprise.
All right. Our next email is also from Scott McFadden about the next episode here. Season 2, Episode 5, The Long Dark. Hello again. I enjoyed your commentary on The Long Dark, and I find that I largely agree with what you had to say about it. This really is Garibaldi's show, and he does a great job with it. The way he deals with Amos is very well done. The issue of PTSD can be a tricky one to deal with, but I think the show handles it well here. The revelation that even Garibaldi, who generally presents himself as cool and in control, also deals with nightmares from his days in combat, and has talked with counselors to help him deal with them, is an important character beat. No one goes through war unchanged, even the people who seem to be handling it well. Worth remembering. Blaine, I will quibble just a bit with your plot synopsis of this episode. You said that Amos willingly sacrifices his life to allow the crew to kill the monster. In fact, while Amos does make himself bait to draw the creature out, he survives the encounter. Dr. Franklin explicitly says that he'll be alright at the end of the episode. Yeah, he did. I just didn't get the impression that Amos really expected to be alright. I thought he was willing to take that step regardless of consequences.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it could have been more clear. Speaking of Franklin, I guess we have to talk about his behavior in this episode. I share your distaste for the way that Franklin crosses his professional boundaries with Mariah. The whole plotline strikes me not so much as a particularly damning statement on Franklin's character, but as rather lazy by-the-numbers writing. It's so often the case in stories, particularly genre stories, that a man and woman simply must have sexual tension between them. It's an obvious plot idea to go for, and Scott Frost went for it here. In a way, it reminds me of how Captain Kirk seemed to flirt with every female guest star who came aboard the Enterprise. Although Kirk's reputation as a playboy is rather exaggerated, I could write a whole nother email about that. Yes, you could, and we would back you.
Mm-hmm.
With one possible exception in the Enterprise incident where he's deliberately manipulating the woman, I can't think of any relationship Kirk started that he wasn't willing to follow through all the way. So there was a lot of women in his life, but he wasn't the kind of person who was choosing to jump from one to the other. It was just the episodic nature of television.
Right.
I agree that it would have been better if Franklin had been more professional in how he interacted with Mariah. He could still believe that she's innocent and still provide her with an alibi without there having to be any romantic tension. Oh well, what might have been. Just one final thought. The ultimate confrontation with the Soldier of Darkness, when it becomes visible in the PPG fire, reminded me very strongly of the wonderful scene where the id monster appears amid the laser beams in the classic movie Forbidden Planet. I don't know if anybody else had that scene in mind when they were making this episode, but it sprang to my mind immediately. Yes, mine too. So again, don't know if that was a production plan, but it was absolutely reminiscent of that.
Mm-hmm.
And Scott wraps up with, I guess that's all I have for now. I'll be traveling during the next couple of weeks, so my feedback might come in a little bit late, but don't worry, I'll catch up. Scott. Yes, your feedback is always welcome whenever you can get to it. And again, we jumped about a week earlier, so that is the last email from Scott McFadden that's going to make it into this recording. But I trust we will have comments from him to kick off our next feedback episode.
Hopefully. Scott, come back. So our next comment is from my website, johnreadscomics.com. There's no H in John. It's from Gene Hendricks. There is an H in Hendricks. And he says, I can see your and JMS's point on giving the relationship time to breathe in this one. But if you're going to have a woman set up as a red herring for the murder of her husband, then having her fall into the arms of another man pretty much immediately is a good way to cast suspicion on her. Okay, fair.
Yeah.
Still don't really love it.
You know, maybe the happy medium where she's flirting with Franklin, but he's saying no would have been a good way to handle it, because he's right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, showing her lack of commitment to the ex does make her a more viable suspect in the murder. So yeah, it works well for the plans for her character. It's just not so well for what we want for Franklin. So yeah, having her flirty and Franklin saying, no, it's not appropriate at this time, might have been the best way to go in this batch. But.
Yep.
So next up, we have comments from Mahatma Randi again on YouTube, dealing specifically with episode 6, Spider in the Web.
Okay. Before we do this, in all fairness, I have not yet gotten to 6 and 7 in my rewatches, so my memories are going to be a bit fuzzy on these, but I'll do my best. Go for it.
Okay. I don't think I understood. Will you not be reviewing the comics except in the first 4? Because honestly, I think the comics were better than the novels. We will be covering the comics. So specifically, our coverage of issues 1 to 4 is scheduled to release on March 22nd. Issues 5 to 8 will be out July 19th. 9 to 11 will be out on September 13th of 2025. The first novel is April 12th, and the second novel is August 16th.
Since the comics came out monthly, that's 11 months of time, and so we just did not do them all in one episode. We spaced them out.
Yeah, so we're trying to group them mostly by story arcs or by how they were collected in the trades. We will also get to the In Valen's Name miniseries. That, because it was published so much later, and we are trying to go in publication order, that will actually be covered on May 13th, 2028, in the middle of our coverage of Season 5.
Right, so way down the road.
Yeah, so those are the ones that we haven't actually read yet. Randy continues. Jessica Walter passed away a few years back. Archer continues, but they had enough of her dialogue in the can before she passed that they were able to write her out of the show with a hastily edited together happily ever after ending. Yeah, well, that was nice.
Yeah.
Then Randy says, this is one of those episodes that I generally don't skip over, and as soon as it's done, I swear to myself I will skip it the next time because there's really nothing worthwhile in it, but somehow I always forget. In general, I do not like the Talia Winters episodes. I do not think the character is generally written very well. Most of her appearances involve her getting some tedious explanation as to why she can't do her job, which I understand the nature of her work involves a number of serious restrictions, but I feel like they hit that nail way too hard and way too many times with her. And in addition to that, the actress usually seems kind of stiff. I've never managed to decide if that was a deliberate choice for the character or if the actress was just kind of stiff. And I think John and I had a lot of comments on that in all of her appearances to date.
Yeah, we did not. We are not the hugest fans of Talia Winters.
Yeah, and again, while we weren't super thrilled with the performance, some of that might be that she didn't have a lot to latch onto, because up to that point, she's almost like the Troy, where She's just there to do the job and state the obvious. In the case of Troy, it's I sense something or I can't sense something, right? She's often there to move the plot forward in ways that could have been done by any other telepath in the B5 universe. She had very few storylines up to this point that really required it to be Talia and not somebody else.
Right.
Either way, I totally understand why she was cast. Curvy Virginia Lake, kind of smoky blonde with a cool voice. But I just have always felt that she was miscast. This episode in particular frustrates me because a lot of it does not make sense to me from the perspective of later events in the series. Anything else I say will be rather spoilery, so I won't say anything else. I believe the unidentified psycho cop in the San Diego ruins was supposed to be Abby. Also, I may be misremembering, but isn't there a scene in the beginning of this episode where Talia is tidying up her room and says, "Pardon the mess, we just had a convention"? If this is that episode, then I believe that is the only on-screen reference to something from the tie-in novels. The very first one, Voices, revolves around Talia and has a Psi-Corps convention on the station.
Oh, is that this one?
I don't know. Because I hadn't read the novel yet, I could have very easily missed that. But yes, that is certainly a tie-in.
I have not rewatched this yet, as I just said, so I'm going to have to look for that whenever we watch it, because that's an interesting connection.
Okay. Initially, JMS had intended for the books and comics and whatever else to all be canonical, though that proved to be a nightmare and was quickly dropped. Then he alludes to something that we will return to when we cover that novel, and comments that he may have said too much. So, yeah. Everything he has there is just acknowledging bits.
Oh, yeah. That's the other thing that you're skipping over. Yeah, we'll have to say that for later.
Okay.
So thank you very much. The idea that the novels would have been acknowledged in the show would have been cool, but novels have a very long production pipeline, probably more than a TV episode. So I can imagine how that would be very difficult to integrate. I think comics are put out in a much tighter pipeline.
Plus it helps that JMS scripted the novels, or scripted some of the comics.
Oh, yeah. When you're the writer, it's a lot easier to work it in.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving along to Douglas Adamson, who is writing on basically the entire stretch of episodes, from Chrysalis through to episode 7, which is Soulmates. He saith, "Hello, Blaine and John." Hello. "Once again, I am able to say that I've been thoroughly enjoying your show. In terms of moving up a gear in Babylon 5, we've had key elements of the introduction of John Sheridan, the influence of Londo growing, which I think is different from Londo's personal influence, and Jacquard's many warnings. While at the same time, we've seen a plot to kill the president of Earth succeed, the disappearance of Sinclair, and the new heir for Delenn, as opposed to the new heir for Delenn, which is a whole other storyline. Yet, looking back, I think that JMS perhaps missed on how everyone would react to the likes of the president dying and Sinclair disappearing suddenly and without warning. I know the Sinclair decision was forced upon JMS and that the filming of Chrysalis was very early in the production run, but I do wonder if perhaps they could have either filmed something extra with Sinclair, like a reaction shot to him being told something like a cover story from the EA, the Earth Alliance, to ward off concerns about the president's death. We'll change how we deal with other races. We've decided that you need to go to Minbari immediately. Something like that. I know it's supposed to be a mystery element, but I think normally the death of a leader, even if they believe it's an accident, would produce more turmoil than Babylon 5 saw. No one else on the news nets is throwing suspicion on if this was an accident of terrorism. Not even try and blame Mars. I guess ISN doesn't have a rival Fox Galaxy News. Those are some good points, because although the presidential assassination has long-reaching ramifications, we didn't really see the short-term fallout. And maybe it's because we're on a station, but yeah, I feel like mentioning something would have been good.
Yeah, and I could imagine that the conspiracies were out and about, but our B5 command crew had the inside knowledge so that they were not engaging in those conversations. But it might be the kind of thing that, would have been background in the Zocalo or something.
Right. I understood the plan to focus on the arrival of John Sheridan into the leading man role, even if I think Jacquard thinks he is the leading character, and to just go full speed to integrate him, but I recall the time it was such a jarring change, particularly as, of the two, I prefer Sinclair. Yeah, I don't know what else there is to do about that,
Yeah, and I think we all just it looks like there's a prevailing opinion that, yes, a smoother transition would have been preferred by all, including the people making the show. But options were limited.
While Jon is currently, or at least was at the time of recording, unaware of the rest of season 2 to follow, I think it's clear that he's been clued in enough to hunt for clues and references as to what is to follow. While some of us did have an idea of the journey the first time round, I think we had bigger surprise moments to us than Jon will have as things progress. I know that can be helped, but I hope Jon, when he gets to those points to come, realizes that back in 94-95, the impact on the fandom and viewership for those points was greater, and he can adjust his perspective now to try and imagine how nuts things went for us back in the day. I feel like Douglas is trying to be oblique because doesn't want to exactly reference things that were to come, but I don't think I knew anything. I'm pretty sure everything about season 2 and to come was a surprise to me, but I don't know. I don't know exactly what he's referring to there.
Yeah, I don't know what else has been mentioned on mic. So
Blaine is also managing to make me want to go back and see if I've missed something on my reviewings of the past. I'm likely to try a season 1 and 2 rewatch in January 25 to jog my memory. But I'm glad that so far every episode both of you have discussed, I can recall the storylines even when not considered arc-driven. Thank you both for your efforts to the podcast series. I am having a blast not only with the main show episodes, but also the He-Man coverage was amusing, even if I have no desire to go back to the original TV series anytime soon. Understandable and relatable.
yes. Yeah, and we have more of that coming. The She-Ra fared better.
She-Ra definitely fared better, but there's other shows coming down the pike.
Yeah, we are about to record coverage of Jace and the Wheeled Warriors, which exists.
Is a thing. I look forward to the next episodes once you get there. In the meantime, let's just hope this new year is less jarring than the changes for 2258 to 2259. Keep up the good work and be seeing you, Doug Adamson.
All right. And in our final piece of feedback for this episode, we have an email from Ryan Wilson about Season 2, Episodes 3 and 4. Hello to the Babylon 5 crew with bonus Van Plexico. The Geometry of Shadows is one of those episodes I don't really remember all that well. I remember the Drazi factions fighting and, of course, the Techno Mages. I was disappointed they don't come back in the show, although they obviously have a novel series about them. We will see them on screen again, but it's going to be a while. Ryan continues, the line about Malari's victims chanting his name does have an ominous feel. And of course, Rifa is a big bunch of trouble. It shows that Londo's views about the Centauri aren't just his and that he might be more moderate than we think. Good to have Ivanova promoted too. And then his comments on the Distant Star. We are starting the part of Season 2 where I don't remember much of what happens. What we do have is Sheridan being proud of the station and has started to think of it as home, more hints of doings on the rim. I found the diet plotline a bit annoying, but fortunately it's over as of this episode, so it doesn't stay too long. Kefir is out of place, but then he was forced into the show, so it makes sense. This is not a commentary on the actor himself, who I think does a fine job, but I do wonder what it would have been like if he'd been given more to work with. Yeah, when you hear our coverage of early Season 4, you will hear me throw out an idea of what I think would have made him a more natural fit to get him into the show in the first place. That would have also meant it's more natural to introduce him in Season 2, Episode 2 than Episode 1. I can't say more about that at this time.
His comments on the diet. Yeah, I like that it didn't stay too long. I feel like it's very natural for someone to get fixated on something in the short term and then wake up one morning and just not really care about it much anymore. So that felt natural.
And then Ryan wraps up with, it's good to see the conversation between Delenn and Sheridan. Anyway, until next time.
And that brings us to the end of our feedback. That's kind of a mammoth episode we just did.
Yes. There's bits we're going to edit out, of course. And there's the bits where my 3-year-old walked in and said hello that might throw in at the tail end as kind of a tag.
But we're still well over 2 hours, approaching 2.5 hours of stuff.
Yeah, we got over 2.5 hours right now that I'm sure will still be over 2 hours when we finish editing. So in any event, yes, that is where we're at. Our next release will be January 25th for A Race Through Dark Places. So, yes, please be here for that. Our next feedback episode will follow, or it'll cover actually up to Season 2, Episode 18. So we've got a good chunk of episodes in there. We are planning to record that on Sunday, June 1st for release on Saturday, June 21st.
Right.
So, yeah, if you are looking to offer more feedback, or if you missed the previously announced deadline because we changed the deadline without telling you, that's where you can hear your comments next.
Alrighty. Yeah, looking at the spreadsheet for season 2, there's a lot of season 2 that I did not remember the details of. So I'm looking forward to going back through it and sort of reminding myself of what happened. So whenever Ryan says I'm getting to the area where I don't remember what's happened, that's relatable.
Yeah. And looking at it now where we have those, there was a broadcast break between episodes 13 and 14. And in that time, we're planning to cover the first 4 issues of the comic and the first novel. If we get enough of the feedback following those 6 episodes, we might drop in an unexpected feedback episode in there as well. Just because, if we have enough to fill an hour, we might do that rather than have another 2.5 or 3 hour feedback after going through 11 episodes, all the comics and 2 novels. Thinking that next feedback might turn to be quite large.
Yep.
So,
alrighty. So that's the near future, and we don't have anything else going on between now and January 25th, right?
Right. Our next, that's the next episode of the podcast. Like we said, we are starting to record our Star Trek Reading Hour podcast, which we're going to be alternating episodes going through 2 tracks. There's the Treklit stuff, and there's just everything else in publication order. That'll start in September 2026, and we do have the Twin Peaks show that we're talking about that has no name yet and not a firm release schedule.
I do want to throw one thing out. Due to the production nature of this show, we don't ever really get to talk about current concerns, but with the start of the new year, I am beginning a new weekly release of something that is a little bit unusual, something that I'm kind of proud of, and I'm hoping that you will give a shot. So if you are subscribed to the John Reads Comics podcast feed, you'll see this automatically. If you're getting this through another means, then you might want to go search the podcasts for The Spider Diaries. The Spider Diaries is sort of a one-man audio adaptation of the early adventures of Spider-Man. It's something I've been working on for a few months now. I've produced 8 of the episodes. I'm going to do another one here today or tomorrow. They're coming out weekly. The first 2 will drop on January 1st, and then 1 episode every week after that. So yeah, go give that a check. And I would love to hear your thoughts if you want to send them into the usual John Reads Comics email. And so that's out there. The Spider Diaries. Yes,
actually, John gave me a chance to listen to the first couple in advance, and I quite enjoyed it. I am looking forward to that.
So yeah, give that a check. And in the meantime, thank you everyone very much for listening, and we will see you next time.
Yes, and good eating to you. Future Blaine here, coming back during editing to clear up some of the things that we said during this feedback episode. First off, I did some checking on the comments. The 1967 Spider-Man and Rocket Robin Hood were both produced by Krantz Films Incorporated, along with Max the 2,000-Year-Old Mouse, Fritz the Cat, Marvel Superheroes from 1966, and a few more. The company later went bankrupt, and its assets were purchased by Vicoa, a cable company, which resold some of those assets to Filmation. That's how the animation used in Rocket Robin Hood and then later Spider-Man also ended up in Star Trek The Animated Series, even though Filmation itself was not involved. Next follow-up, the first clip show was Looking In on the BBC. That aired in 1933. It is the oldest surviving recording of broadcast television. So they were just recording a summary of what they had done up to that point. In terms of the comments a lot of people had about wishing that there was a shot or scene with Sinclair getting his orders, when the filming of Season 2 began, Michael O'Hare was working on a New York stage. So he was not available to fly to LA to film anything for the Season 2 premiere. I don't know if he was invited or not, but he could not have made that trip if they wanted him to. So that may be another monkey wrench in why that didn't happen. Now the big one. I checked the opening credits on the first 2 episodes of Season 2 on my DVDs. I am the one who is misremembering, as some of our listeners pointed out. The first 2 episodes on the DVDs do have the Season 2 credits, not Season 1. And they are the version of the season 2 credits with Delenn after she emerges from the chrysalis. This could be why I didn't notice Randy's comment about Sheridan's re-recording, or Brock Leiter's re-recording of the intro. I think I clearly remember that there was a problem with it. In this case, it was spoiling her new look. But I somehow got the wrong idea. I don't even know how, because in retrospect, it wouldn't have made sense. I'm sure union rules would not have allowed them to use the Michael O'Hare credits when Bruce Boxleitner was in the show. But in any event, yes. That is the way they are in the DVDs. I can't check the original broadcast, but I'll trust that our listeners who said it went this way were correct. So yeah, they have Delenn's human hair on the DVDs, not the Michael O'Hare version from season 1. I apologize for that confusion, and I promise to do better in the future. Now, as promised, the guest appearance by my daughter.
Okay. We have a guest in this episode.
Is that Pippa?
Yes, Pippa's here.
Hello, Pippa.
Oh, okay. John is saying hello, but you can't hear him. Let me share the microphone or the headphones.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, she can hear you now.
Hi, Pippa. I don't know if you've ever heard my voice before.
I got the baby.
You have a baby?
Yeah.
Wow. What's she doing?
She's crawling, baby.
Yeah, she might be crawling. All right, John and I are almost done the podcast here. So, can you sit quietly while Daddy reads the rest of this message? Thank you.
Initially, JMS had intended for the books and comics and whatever else to all be canonical, though that proved to be a nightmare and was quickly dropped. Then he alludes to something that we will return to when we cover that novel, and comments that he may have said too much. So, yeah, everything he has there is just acknowledging bits. Okay.
Oh, yeah, that's the other thing that you're skipping over. Yeah, we'll have to say that for later.
Okay.
Okay. So thank you very much. The idea that the novels would have been acknowledged in the show would have been cool, but novels have a very long production pipeline, probably more than a TV episode. So I can imagine how that would be very difficult to integrate. I think comics are put out in a much tighter pipeline.
Ma.
You want Mommy?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm going to bring Pippa back to Mommy, and I'll be right back, John.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, let's find Mommy.
Why did the chicken cross the road? 'Cause. How many Centauri does it take to sweep the kitchen? 2. Because one has to hold the other one upside down to sweep the broom. Why was Cartagia so successful in becoming politics? He knows how to get ahead.
Okay, I am back.
There are jokes for you in the editing.
Okay.